All those in favor of adding to the agenda an exec session this afternoon?
Aye.
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 It passes 5-0, and it is added. And now it is time for public comments, so anybody who wishes to make comments that are not related to items on the agenda today, come on up. Do we have anybody online? Anybody online?
They work for grassroots, they don't work in the room.
Oh, I see, okay. Okey dokey. Okay, two quick ones and then a longer one. I'm asking if I don't know what you've done, but I'm asking if the county commissioners would possibly donate money, give it to me.
Could you just
for
back up and
Ukra-
state who you are, please, for the record?
Your name first.
Your name.
My name is Ruth Harrison.
Thank you. Now everybody listening knows.
They know anyway. I'm asking for money for Ukraine. If you need a nonprofit number, I can get you one. I have bought tens of 20s of 30s of military jackets for them, sent them over. I've gotten some donations. I've sent medical supplies, tourniquets. I have a connection in Ukraine who they tell me what they need, and I've been going around getting stuff from places in Utah, Denver, all over. So it'd be great if the county commissioners could donate. Number two, 30 plus years ago, we talked about houses not being any larger than 5,000 square feet. It would have been nice if we adopted it then. Something needs to be done. Number three, I wish, almost demand, we say no to privatizing public land. Locals should especially care about this, since it is our final stomping ground. We have nothing left as the town is ruined. The backcountry, including the back of Aspen Mountain, is our last hurrah. Do not let anyone exploit it for personal use. Please prohibit STRs in all rural and remote areas. We need stronger rules, no commercial exploration. Now I'm worried about cabins, etc., by Pandora's on the private land that is there. If you haven't read Mick Ireland's column, December 12th, in the Aspen Daily News, it's excellent, unrural and not very remote. I'm done.
Well, thank you, Ruth. Steve?
Question for you, Ruth.
Yes.
Are you working with Art Davidson?
I'm not. I did at the beginning, and it was, he's doing a great job, but he's very busy, and he goes to Alaska a lot, and I had a hard time working to get stuff followed through on for me to go over there. Like I said, he and Hans Cordes have done a great job, but I'm doing it separately, and I'm hoping to go in March. I have totally different connections than they do, and I connected with a gal from Avon, and she has been doing amazing stuff, and actually she did a fundraiser in Avon, and I'm working on having a fundraiser here, hopefully at the Grill. We're working it out, and we'll have a live band. I know I'm stepping ahead of myself because it's not a done deal yet. A live bluegrass band, and it'll be something like a trivia night or something like that, a fun activity to raise money. So this is a whole different group, and we've sent incredible stuff.
Okay, well, thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
working on getting aid to Ukraine.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Ruth.
Thank you, Ruth.
You're welcome.
Thanks
Good
for
to see you.
coming.
This is something we'll bring back and discuss as a board at another time.
You mean you're not going to tell me now?
No. I got to say no to Ruth Harrison.
We will talk about
God,
it.
that was such a good feeling.
Yeah, you.
And I read your letter this morning to the editors.
Well, they took out the line that I said, the new people at Centennial are as bad as the Aspen Times. They took that out, imagine that. It's been real, thank you, thanks for what you do, thank you for devoting your time. I know you get paid, but still, it's a lot of time.
Thanks, Ruth.
Thanks, Ruth.
You're welcome.
I don't believe there's anybody else in the room. Anybody else online?
Anybody want to top that?
I forgot my water in the hallway. I will be right back.
If there's anybody online who wishes to speak, I think all those people are presenters. Yeah. Okay. So we're going to move on to the consent items. We have the minutes of the January 11th meeting and.
Commissioner comments?
Oh, Commissioner comments. Good thing you're here. Yes. Do we have Commissioner comments?
Oh, I do have one. but
Okay.
I can, Steve had his hand up first, I think.
Go ahead.
Okay, my comment is that for the next 2 nights, at, let's see, at the 3rd Street Center at 6 PM tonight, Safe Passages, which is talking about wildlife overpasses and safe wildlife crossings, has a presenter with the woman who has been building these things and in Summit, in Eagle County. We'll be presenting tonight at the 3rd Street Center at 6 and tomorrow night at Aces at 6 o'clock. Same topic, 2 venues. Just thought
Okay.
I'd share that with the public.
Thank you.
And I'm gonna try to go, I think tonight to Carbondale, weather permitting.
Steve?
So this will be my last meeting for a few weeks with being here in person. Our next regular meeting, I will be in Fairbanks, tuning in on the Zoom call. So I'm looking forward to visiting my daughter and 6-month-old grandbaby up in Fairbanks and seeing the northern lights, which are spectacular in the Fairbanks area.
Great.
Safe travels.
Kelly or Patty?
I'll make some comments.
Okay.
All right, Friday night's kickoff for Friday for X Games. Town is already starting to fill up, it's my understanding. Obviously, traffic is increased. So I encourage everybody to remember that it's a no alcohol, no substance of sorts event, and it's a no parking event, so you need to take mass transit. Best chances are either from Ruby Park or from the Park and Ride, Brush Creek Park and Ride, or all the way from Down Valley. Once the Park and Ride lot does get full. So I hope people enjoy and be safe out there. It's an amazing event. Concerts will be held during the day between breaks in events, so you don't have to leave the venue and come back later, which makes it really convenient for people just to hang out and enjoy. So be out there, be safe, and have fun.
Thank you. Well, I was shocked to hear about the shootings in California. They seemed so completely random and they're all unnecessary, but I was encouraged this morning to see in the paper that the state legislature in Colorado is considering a ban on assault weapons. So in whatever we can do in whatever way to support that effort would be great, in my opinion. Anybody else?
Okay.
Okay. Now we'll move on to the consent items. We have the minutes of January 11th, 2023, and we have a resolution to appoint citizen board members. Does anybody want to pull either of those?
I'd like to pull the second item. I have a question about the wording on it.
Okay, so.
And I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of the January 11th meeting.
I can second that.
Great. All those in favor of approving the minutes from January 11th, please say aye.
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 It passes 5-0. So what would you like to say about the resolution to appoint
So
citizen
on the
board members?
second page, it's actually on the resolution itself. It's, this is appointing Susan Marolt, the new mayor of the town of Snowmass Village. So it says in the line, it has an ALT period at the end,
Some mayors.
indicating that that would be an alternate position, I believe. But I didn't think that the representatives from Snowmass Village and Aspen were alternates. I think they're regular voting members of the Board of Health. I just wanted clarification on that, and perhaps that's a mistake having the ALT written in there.
I don't know the answer to that. Do you, John?
Well, so there are 2 appointed from each jurisdiction. So, for example, Pickens County has a appointed and an alternate. So does Aspen and Snowmass Village. And double check whether she is the alternate. I'm not seeing, I'm sorry, I'm just not pulling it up right now, whether Bill was the alternate or not. That's being
I
replaced.
remember in the last meeting welcoming Susan, but I'm not clear on whether or not, at this point, it's been too long, whether Bill is still the primary. I think she might be the primary now, but we'd have to confirm that. So
Is she
thank
the
you.
mayor?
No, Bill is
Oh,
the
Steve
mayor.
said she was the mayor, and I'm like,
She's the.
she's a new
maybe she's
councilman.
the
A new
mayor.
council.
It
Yeah,
says
new
right
council.
here that Susan Morrell was elected as mayor of Town of Snowmass Village in November 2022.
Really?
And she has been appointed to
Something's up with
replace
this.
Bill Madsen on the Board of Health. She will assume Bill's term expiration date of April 1st, 2026.
I think she did not run for mayor. She ran for council.
For
right?
council.
So we need a little,
We need
So
a
We need to
correction.
maybe
clarify.
we
the,
need some corrections on this
yeah, there's
resolution.
some,
So let us not vote to pass it.
I move to continue this item until our meeting on February, it's our next meeting date. 8th?
Okay,
Board of Health won't meet till March, so I think it's okay.
do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor of continuing this item until the meeting on February 8th, please say aye.
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 Thanks,
It
Steve, for bringing that
passes.
up.
We caught lots of mistakes by that. Good job, Steve.
We count on Steve for those things.
Yeah. Okay, and then we have some confirmatory public hearings, but we don't have to open that to public hearing if it's just confirmatory, right? If it's an emergency ordinance?
If it's a confirmatory reading, you do have to open it up for public hearing.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the first one is an emergency ordinance of the Board of County Commissioners of Pitkin County adopting Title 6.05 of the Pitkin County Code, Secure Transportation Services. Phyllis.
Hey there, Phyllis Mattice, Deputy County Manager. The Colorado adopted House Bill 21-1085, which required counties to establish licensing and permitting rules and regulations for behavioral health secure transit. So that's why this was an emergency ordinance. They required it to be in place by January 1st. We were close. But we still have not had any service providers request licensing or permitting of the vehicles, licensing of the service for this area. We only have one provider that's contracted with Aspen Valley Hospital. They serve the whole western slope. Our assumption is they've been licensed somewhere else. There's no sanctions for not doing this. Consequences are up to the county, so all the counties are trying to figure this out. It was kind of rushed, I'm going to say. I mean, it was just very complex to be able to put into place quickly. So not necessarily rushed. We put it together. We've managed to do it. So we do have regulations. Our best way to put this together is putting it in the county code. So it's a newly adopted section of the code, which you're doing now, and confirming that it is there. All the links were put in place when Jeanette posted it in the code. So we identified a lot in our code that it refers back to the Colorado Code of Colorado Regulations, CCR. And so we have links to that document so people can figure out exactly what the state is requiring. It requires training for employees who are providing transit of people in behavioral health crisis, what kind of supplies need to be on the vehicles, what equipment, if there's restraints, how those are used. So it's really a safety piece of legislation for people in behavioral health crisis.
Do we have any questions for Phyllis?
Nothing's changed since first reading?
Nothing.
Then I'll open up the public hearing and see if there's anybody in the public who'd like to comment on this. Anybody on there? Okay, so I'll close the public hearing on this emergency ordinance and look for a motion to pass it.
so I'll make a motion to approve the emergency ordinance adopting Title 6.05 of the Pitkin County Code, Secure Transportation Services.
I'll second that.
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Okay, it has passed 5 to
Thank you,
0.
Phyllis.
Thanks,
Thank
Phyllis.
you.
The next emergency resolution is authorizing Pickens County Solid Waste Center to submit grant applications to the United States Environmental Protection Agency for the Consumer Recycling and Outreach Grant Program and the Solid Waste Infrastructure for Recycling Grant Program for Political Subdivisions of States and Territories Grant Program. Brian?
I think Kathy Hall's on.
Okay. Hi, Kathy. Welcome.
Hello, Board and Commissioners. Thank you. So yeah, this is just our follow-up. We are submitting 2 grants, again, through the federal EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, for a total of $2.5 million we're going to be asking for. And these grants are part of the federal government's legislation on the Build Back Better legislation that passed in early 2022, I believe. So we are just looking for approval to submit the grants. The grants now are due February 15th. They gave a month extension, hence the emergency ordinance. We thought they were going to be due a lot sooner. So yeah, so that's what it is. Nothing has changed from our original presentation 2 weeks ago.
Any questions for Kathy? Yes, Greg?
Sure, just one. This one's focused on food waste in both grants, food waste and then infrastructure for food waste. Is that correct?
Correct. Most of it will be on reducing food waste and improving our compost operations. And we're going to focus on, through the outreach education grant, the tourist impacts that are heavily impact, particularly in the food waste area, and reaching out to younger people, school-age kids.
That's great. I really support this and think it's great. The energy that's embedded in food waste is incredibly high. It's really actually a great energy source. So whether it's nutrition in the ground or other creative purposes. So I'm excited about this. Thanks.
Steve?
So Kathy, I wanted to clarify, it mentions metal bear resistant compost bins, but are they actually just collecting the food waste to take to the landfill to be composted at the landfill? That's what the intention is, isn't it?
Absolutely, and these will be the same bins that we purchased through the 2015 state grant we received. A lot of those bins now are in need of replacement. And then buying extra bins. City of Aspen is a partner with us on these grants, and they are getting ready to pass a food waste collection ordinance. So it'll be providing some of that infrastructure to support them.
Okay, and then individuals could get a compost bucket for their own house. That then would they have to take that into one of the bigger bins somewhere in town or bring it directly to the landfill?
Yes.
That'll be some of the options. So we always have the option of, you can bring it up here for free and tip it into our bin here. A lot of residential communities or people's businesses have food waste, these metal bear-proof containers, or you can subscribe to a curbside service through the 2 haulers in the valley that do that. So there are a number of options you can take advantage of.
And are we
Okay.
contracted with Evergreen?
Yes, I believe the county to collections, the county, many of the county buildings have a food waste bear-proof bin to collect food waste, and I believe it is Evergreen that services that contract.
Okay. Did you have something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that the compost bins in particular are the ones that decay or degrade quicker because of the moisture content of the compost. So you see them rusting. We've got one in those 7 years has rusted away to, it looks 20 years older than the trash dumpsters next to it. So yeah, but to be bear proof, you can't make it out of plastic. So it's something that goes away quicker. It disintegrates more rapidly.
Ours are plastic at Fat Belly, but they're inside a shed
They're in
with
a
locks on.
locked- Yeah. Thank you.
Any other questions for Kathy? I'll open it up for the public hearing. Does anybody in the public have any comments on this resolution? Nobody? Okay, I'll close the public hearing and look for a motion.
I'd make a motion to approve.
And a second?
I'll second the motion.
I do have a discussion real quick.
Okay.
We had left it, one of us was gonna reach out to CC4CA for a letter of support on this.
Yeah, we did, and I did, and CC4CA is an interesting thing. They've got 41 or 42 members, and their concern was if there's a conflict with any other member who might be applying for the same grant, and all of a sudden all these various equity issues came up regarding, and so I just thought, I said, I don't think anybody else is applying for this, but I certainly don't know. And I think they demur. They tend to demur when one entity asks them to do something in particular like this, which is unfortunate. It'd be great if they had the capacity, but, so that's as far as I got, and I apologize that it didn't go any farther, because it just didn't seem worth going out and lobbying 40 other municipalities and counties to do this. But
Thank you.
It'd be
for
nice if we had
following
the
up. I
ability.
appreciate it. But
Yeah.
we are submitting a letter of support for you, right, Kathy? I think our board, so.
Yeah.
Correct, and I sent over a template letter, for you to modify as needed to Charlotte this morning.
Oh, great, thanks.
And I have this picture. I feel like when we did some other solid waste thing where I'm sitting on my compost bin, which is the largest of our our waste receptacles, and then Bridget is sitting on the recycling bin, and then Al was a little baby and he's inside the little trash can.
Oh, that's great.
Compost.
Yeah.
That's really cute.
Yeah, it's definitely the largest part of our household waste. So I'm excited for this. Thanks, Kathy.
Did we vote before you made your
No, I
comment?
didn't.
All right, so I'm looking for a vote on the authorizing Pitkin County Solid Waste Center to submit grant applications. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye, it passes 5-0.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Kathy. Okay.
Oh, she left.
What?
I'll say to Brent, would it be helpful to reach out to Recycle Colorado for any support here on this? Okay, I'm very close
Do
to
we
that
have
director.
time? Do we still
so-
want to?
I don't know. It's a quick
It's
text.
not due till the
so-
15th of February.
I'll do that and follow up.
Okay, we're going to move on to individual consideration items. This is the first readings, and they're set for public hearings on February 8th. First one is the ordinance of the Board of County Commissioners amending Title IX of the Pitkin County Code, Section 9.08.130, regarding definitions and repealing and reenacting Title IX, Section 9.12, regarding the road maintenance and management plan. And I believe Brian is going to introduce people, and we'll have a little presentation.
Great, thank you. Brian Pettit, I'm the Public Works Director.
DJ Hughes, Road and Bridge Manager.
I'm Scott Mattice, the Deputy Public Works Director.
Great.
Good to see
So
you.
we're here to talk about the road maintenance and management plan, which we amend periodically. We try to do it every couple of years, but with COVID, we did it, this is the third year, I think we were working off the last form. But really, the road maintenance management plan is to give staff direction on how to maintain and manage the county roads, and to give residents and visitors an opportunity to understand what they can expect on the roads that they live in or that they're traveling on. So it is our Bible when it comes to road maintenance. This year, we did make a lot of housekeeping changes, but there were a few changes that were made that involved public process. That was with regard to closure gates on Maroon Creek Road and Castle Creek Road. And Scott will get into the process that he took on in order to make those changes and involve stakeholders. Other changes were we increased our permit fees by $100 in order to better reflect the cost of orchestrating that program. It takes a lot of time to take care of the permits. They're getting more and more complex as technology shifts. With that, we did remove all of the U.S. Forest Service numbers off the county roads. That was kind of a holdover, a historic relic that needed to be changed because it was confusing, frankly. And these are county roads. They may have been Forest Service roads over 60 years ago, but they're not now. So we decided to make that change on the road maintenance management plan. And we did move Castle and Maroon Creek, the upper part, from a limited service level to a low service level. which allows us to remove snow off of those roads, which was occurring virtually every spring anyway. So with that, the gate program, Scott, why don't you talk about how you handled that change?
Yeah, you bet. So 2 falls ago, which was November of 21, winter was fairly delayed that year. And at that time, and still currently, the current verbiage says on or around November 15th, we will close the gates. It didn't snow. There was some folks that were expecting to go up there and see it closed, and some folks were happy it was open. But it really shone the light on the situation that it was just really hard to manage that closure with all the new users we have in these valleys. And there's, I think anything you can think of on snow or dirt, they're doing it up there. So at that time, we decided let's try to pursue a little better management plan for these gates. And if we thought if we set a date, it would be great. We could sign it. We could swing the gate closed, and we'll make it 6 a.m. or whatever time. But we could sign it, put it on the big variable message signs, put the newspaper, social media, wherever to actually close those gates, and let all users adjust their lives around those dates. So we came up with that idea in the spring of last year. I started reaching out to the residents in the area, Pine Creek Cookhouse, Ashcroft Ski Touring, Braun Huts, T-Lazy 7, our partners at the Forest Service, Division of Wildlife, and probably a couple others through emails. But for the most part, we were emailing and did a couple virtual meetings at that time. We originally landed with the U.S. Forest Service and Division of Wildlife. I think the 25th originally was the date we thought. And with our stakeholders, we thought that was the correct date too. Between us sending our paperwork into you guys and actually meeting in front of you, that changed to actually the 15th. And so we came back and recommended the 15th last year. And then again, a couple of weeks ago, we recommended the 15th again. And that's kind of where we're at today. Those stakeholders I mentioned, and probably a couple others, as they've shared emails back and forth, have been in the loop through the last year and a half as we're going through this process. I let them know we're here today, and again, we'll be meeting next week for the second reading.
I'll add one more thing, and because this is a theme we're going to see as our residents and visitors get more and more diverse. I think it's going to be important for us to have a more objective and black and white closure on roads because of the diversity and the different uses. The general public wants to have expectations on closures of roads, and it's not where it was 30 years ago. We just didn't have the kind of impacts that we're seeing these days. And so that's really the shift. It's thematic in purpose. If you look at the Forest Service or anybody that's dealing with public access on federal lands, they're doing the very same thing.
Question? So with that in mind, I appreciate that. We see that pressure it's happening everywhere. And I'm just wondering, say the Braun Hut system needs to get up and do something, there's no snow, it's November 21st. Are they going to, if they had to truck something in to get the hut set up or something, is that possible? Is there a key access for people who are trying to keep all the wheels on, or is this just a firm closure? So, no, if the cookhouse needs a new refrigerator, can they get in there, or is this? How does this work? How do you? For special cases like that where they're actually serving the public in some way and might need access, is that even, is there any discretion on your part?
It's possible. We would hope that they would plan for the 15th closure and that they would make those changes. And I think that generally that's happening.
Yeah.
Any kind of services that are being rendered up there are happening during the summer. Frankly.
Right. So they're aware of it and prepared for it. I'm just wondering what happens in the case of a mountain rescue. You can open the gate for them if that's the easiest way to get the ambulance in, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If it's a public safety issue,
right.
We can
Otherwise, they put the refrigerator on the sled behind the horses.
Right. You tow the Clydesdales can pull it up. Right. Thank you.
And I think it's worth mentioning too, over the years we have had a great communication with Pine Creek Cookhouse and Ski Touring, and we've worked with each other to help in circumstances for things that have broken early or late, and help them with our machines or their machines to help get some stuff to and fro. We've been in communication for years.
Right. You guys have been in partnership for as long as they've been doing that. So
Yeah.
great.
That's correct.
Yeah. Thank you.
Steve?
I was thinking of a similar situation, and I thought of on Prince Creek Road where all the cattle were on the wrong side of the locked gate. But up on Marooner Castle, there could be a hunter, out-of-state hunters who are not aware of the road closure, who could get trapped on the wrong side of the gate. They're up there, you don't realize that they're camped somewhere up there. And then they're driving out, they get to the gate and the gate is locked. So I would hope there'd be some way that we could, for a special situation like Greg pointed out, that we could unlock the gate to let somebody out who inadvertently ended up on the wrong side with a vehicle.
Absolutely, yeah. And, meeting with Curtis from the Division of Wildlife, I think he had mentioned, and I'll have to look back, but I think he'd mentioned they could put it in their literature too. If we selected a date of closure, our variable message sign goes out 2 weeks before that closure actually happens already. So the beginning of that season happens after that big flashy sign is sitting there, and if it's a big aluminum sign sitting there, but there is other ways to message that, and I think Curtis was willing to look into some options too.
And I think, having a good sign there early enough that if a hunter is going in there to know that they need to be out should eliminate or minimize that problem.
Yeah, and then the road and bridge crew sweeps the area. We just don't close the gate. They go in, they drive the area to make sure there's no camping. But I guess it could come to pass that someone's beyond the snow level and camping, but we haven't had that yet.
Get them in the spring.
It could be, there have been camps trapped on flat tops before.
Absolutely.
They just get caught by a huge snowstorm, and I think they just have to leave their trucks and everything there till the snow melts.
I was hiking the Fifth First one year and parked at the 4th of July campground with my Jeep Wagoneer. And by the time I came out at Brainerd Lake, it had been snowing like mad. By the time the snow was over, we couldn't even find the car. We sent in snowcats from Eldora and all kinds of stuff, and it was there for a long time. It cost so much to get it out, I had to give it to the tow company. Any more questions? Any more for you to tell us about? Any more changes?
Nope.
Okay. Any more comments from commissioners?
Only that I'm impressed by the condition of the county roads. Even in this variable weather, we've been having the freeze thaws and all the, I'm seeing potholes mostly on the state highway, but it seems like our roads are in pretty good shape, and I just want to say kudos to the road crews to keep them maintained, keep them plowed and fix them. You guys are doing a great job, and I've seen somebody wrote a nice letter to the paper complimenting you all recently, and I really appreciated that.
Yes.
Was it a column or a letter?
Yeah, it was
Kelly
column.
Hayes.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll have to get him out there to visit the shop. Give him a ride.
We're trying.
Okay, good.
Okay, so I'll look for a motion to approve ordinance of amending Title IX of the Pitkin County Code regarding definitions and repealing and reenacting Title IX, Section 9.12 regarding the road maintenance and management plan.
So moved and set for public hearing and second reading on February 8th.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Thank you.
It
Thanks,
is
guys.
approved by everyone. Thank you, guys.
Thanks for coming.
And the gate's closed, right?
Next item is an ordinance of the Board of County Commissioners authorizing the renewal of open space and trails agricultural leases between the Board of County Commissioners and Grange Family Ranches LLC for Emma North, I think that's supposed to be, Two Roots Farm LLC for Emma Schoolhouse South and Mather House, Alex Parker for Glacier Lease A, Tony Wagner for Grace Open Space, and Ty Bertard for Thompson Divide Ranch. And hi.
Hey.
How are
Hi,
you?
everyone. So Drew Walters, agricultural specialist, the open space and trails, and here with Paul.
Yeah, Paul Singer, agriculture and conservation easement manager. I just came along to give a little background before we jump into these renewals, because this is the first time we've done agricultural lease renewals based on a policy that we adopted back in January of 2022. And that policy, the agricultural policy and process, was put in place after about a year-long public process. We got an agricultural task force together and did some personal communications with farmers and ranchers to find out how open space and trails properties could better serve them and how our process could be more fair and equitable. Through that process, one of the big takeaways was land tenure in this valley is really important for agricultural business development. It really helps those lessees invest in our properties, and it just gives them more financial stability. So when we heard that, we changed our process to, instead of once a lease is up at the end of a year and going out to just a competitive bid process, we decided to put in place this renewal process. So if we had a lessee that was in good standing, and the board, Open Space and Trails Board, and staff were comfortable with just renewing their lease, then we would just make that recommendation and bring it back for a renewal. So those folks would know that if they continue to be good stewards of our properties, that they would be rewarded with a renewal of their leases. And with that, another good thing from that policy update was that we wanted to hire an agriculture specialist, and there he is. So we've acted on all of these action items that we had in this policy. I can answer questions about that policy, but I just wanted to make sure we all know why we're doing these renewals instead of a competitive bid process for, like we're doing for Wheatley later on.
Do we share you with the extension service, or, yeah?
Yeah, so it's a 20% extension appointment, 80% open space and trails. And there's a lot of intermixed projects and things like that as well.
That's what I thought. Okay.
Could you just tell me a little bit, Paul, about the lease extension and renewal process? I'm looking just as an example here. We've got Two Roots Farm, 10-year term, renewal option after 5 years. They all seem to vary a little bit.
Yeah, so the Two Roots is a special case where Two Roots, when they've initially got that lease, we had our old policy in place, and they wanted to have that ability to renew, but we didn't have the policy to renew. So they've kind of come to a point where they've hit that 5-year for their personal lease. So they've just been folded into our renewal process, but now at the end of this next 10 years, they'll have the same option as all these other lessees. And with the hiring of Drew back in April, he did a lot more, I guess, site assessments and constant contact with those lessees. That was part of the policy as well, to increase our presence there, to make sure that those lessees are performing how we want them to perform. So when we went through this process with the Open Space and Trails Board, we presented a lot more information about production and kind of gave them the scorecard. Drew actually has agricultural, I forget what we call it, your memo, but we're going to make that a public document. It's an agricultural report, Picken County agricultural report.
So,
On each lease?
I guess the question is, say something, perhaps performance isn't as good. You want to give the farmers the confidence that they're going to have a place to farm, but say things don't go right and the county perceives something's wrong. What happens with those? How does it work?
We do have it's lined out in the policy that we'll give them those notes at the end of the year, and we'll give them 1 year to make it right. If not, then it goes out to a public bid process, and we find
so
a new
lease cannot be
lessee
broken.
possibly.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So we're obligated, but so are they, and it sounds like it's pretty fair.
Yes, and
I
equitable.
have a question about your packet. So I was looking for something on the Thompson Divide, but there really wasn't anything. Are you going to talk to us about that a little bit, or
Yeah,
could you?
We'll go over that
Okay.
when we get to it.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, Paul did a great overview of this policy, and really one thing I want to touch on too, from a land management standpoint, having good stewards on our properties is a really good thing for the county. So we really want to promote that. Particularly with these longer term leases, one thing that we consider is the amount of financial investment that the particular lessees will have on those properties. And so if we look at a property like Two Roots at Emma, they have a lot of infrastructure that's on that property that's owned by Two Roots. And so that investment requires a little bit different drafting of a lease. So that's why we have the 10-year with a 5-year renewal. So they have that security where they can plan, for 5 years if there is some type of movement there. Like Paul mentioned, I'm just going to go quickly over the process that we had for this, or for these renewals, and I can go into the individual renewals if you all would like. So, this policy was adopted in January 2022, so this is the first time that we're going through this, as Paul mentioned. After evaluating the expiring leases on November 3rd, we recommended these renewals to the Open Space and Trails Board with the terms for the particular leases. So for Emma North with Grange Family Ranches LLC, it's a 5-year term. Emma Schoolhouse South and Mather House for Two Roots Farm LLC, it's a 10-year term with a 5-year renewal, so the same as what they had previously. For Glacier Lease A with Alec Parker, it's a 5-year term. And then for Grace Open Space and Tony Wagner, or Grace Open Space with Tony Wagner, that's a 2-year term. And same with Thompson Divide Ranch with Ty Bertard, it's a 2-year term. The main reason that we're proposing a 2-year term as opposed to a traditional 1-year lease for properties that don't have a management plan, and particularly these two properties, is because we don't have a management plan that's scheduled for 2023 for those properties. So this is just kind of our foresight on knowing that we're going to have to do this again next year for a lease. Why not just give them a 2-year lease here, so we can go ahead and do that management planning process, and we don't have to just renew it every year. So the Open Space and Trails Board unanimously approved to put these requests forward to you all on November 3rd.
Patty?
Yeah, in going through your agenda item summary, and thank you, it was very, very concise and very easy to get through. I'm in agreement with all the provisions that you have offered, especially when it comes to the Grace Open Space and Thompson Divide, to waive their lease fees for this first 2 years, because we're still in the management development process, so I agree with that. The one question I do have is the lease with the Glacier Lease A with Alex Parker.
Yes.
Why was there not the ability to negotiate a rate?
So we're in that process, and so part of the lease policy and process was to I don't want to call it standardizing, but to have specific rates that we have on our properties. And so we're in the process of negotiating with lessees on price points. Historically, they've been part of the proposal process to make it more equitable, so we don't have folks that might have a lot of money and they propose a very large sum of money. We're going to have fixed prices that are based on standards, but also at a heavy discounted rate, because they have not only it's part of this program, but also they have a lot of other requirements that other lessees don't have.
So it's kind of like a scale?
It's a little bit of a scale, depending on what the property productivity is, but also we want to have kind of a centralized point. So with Alex lease in particular, he did have an increase on his lease rate. So we're trying to figure out exactly how to get to that point from his original lease rate. So yeah, most of the lease rates are about the same based on this, but Alex in particular was an increase. Grange Family Ranch at Emma North was also an increase, but they've agreed to the lease rate that we've proposed.
Right, and I definitely agree with the ability of the Mather House to be part of Two Roots, because having the leasee available on property, on site, I think is something we want to encourage more, and this is a perfect opportunity to do so. So thank you.
Thank you.
What are the leases? I was looking for that. Couldn't put my hands on.
Like the amounts?
Yeah, the amounts. I
Okay,
mean,
so
like
the
an average one. I mean, I remember seeing them before, but I couldn't find them in this.
Yeah, so the lease rate per acre that we're looking at is $25 per acre per year. And that is based off of regional assessments of lease rates for land that is not as productive as the land that we have. And the reason that we're kind of having that just as a baseline is because of these other stipulations that these lessees are held to in the management plans and easements and things like that. So that rate is where that's our starting point, and from there we're going, one way or the other. What I also have done for these properties, we have certain agricultural leases that expand outside of the boundaries of what I would consider productive agricultural land. So I'm restricting that lease rate just to the productive agricultural land on those properties to make it as fair as possible, because a lot of times the lessees are doing the county a favor in maintaining these boundary areas and things like that for the leases. As far as the lease rate totals that we have, let me just check real quick.
And I've just brought up a map just to give you a tour of kind of what we're looking at. And most of our agricultural leases are here in the Emma area. This map shows basalt right here. Rio Grande Trail kind of travels right through here, but this is the Grace and Shihai open space. Here's the Emma conglomerate with Grace open space here. Here's our Glacier open space. Lease A is this top part up here.
Did we have was there a cleanup part of that? That was the one that had a lot of implements and things scattered around. Has that been taken care of or sorted that out?
Yeah, that's one thing that we did this year, and it was that lease A was actually part of the lease exchange that we had. So that agricultural lease, is actually a little bit smaller than it has been historically.
Yeah, it was traded for, that access was traded for the stuff that goes up on the crown or something?
There's a little piece, I don't know if you can see, there's a little piece kind of right up here. It's not showing, but we traded kind of this
The dog leg.
area down here, yeah, for a little piece up here.
Flagpole, right?
Yeah,
Flagpole?
flagpole,
Dog leg.
whatever you feel like makes sense. But yeah, that was part of it. Has been cleaned up.
Great, thank you.
As far as the lease rate totals, do you want me to go through for each of these properties, just so you all know?
I don't need that.
No.
Does anybody else?
We're good.
And we leased one of those properties that had a portion of it that's not productive, right?
That's right.
But that's the next lease coming up.
Is it still true that up valley, landowners pay people to work their land, and down valley,
We pay.
landowners lease for hire? Is that true?
Honestly, I haven't really heard of people paying for people to work their land, but I am pretty new to Up Valley. Down Valley leasing is a common practice.
But they
And-
have ranch managers and stuff that run the ranches up valley.
Groomsmen.
Yeah,
Yep.
totally.
Yeah, it was the case where they really wanted people to work the land, like you said, for that ag tax break. And I don't think that's changed.
No, I know personally it has not.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah.
Before you go on, I have another map here that I'll show you where Thompson Divide sits. This is that property way over here. Carbondale's up here. It has some access issues. You have to go through private property to get to it. And we just don't have a lot of information on the property because we're still waiting to do that management plan. And you have to go through Bertard property to get to it.
Well, it just
So-
happens to be leased to a Bertard.
So Ty Bertard, who has been taking care of it, is going to continue for the next couple years until we actually schedule out when this is going to be a public property. But it's also one of those properties where we want to show the public what we have, but we don't want to highlight it and focus them in on it to get them to it, because you can access it. but it's very hard,
Yeah.
and
Especially
we
in the
don't.
winter.
Yeah, we don't want to get people in trouble out there.
It's just for grazing, right? I mean,
Yeah.
And the bird charts have been up there for so long, surely their lease wouldn't be at risk. Or-
Jack Arbony, who is Ty's grandfather, has this piece right here. He actually has half of it in a conservation easement with AVLT. And Ty's uncle and aunt have this piece
Is that
right here.
Jeff?
Jerry, who actually
Jerry.
passed away a couple years ago. Yeah. So that's that. All the other agricultural leases are back over here. That was that first map. Most of our stuff is right over here.
Steve?
Some of us on our board have talked about the idea of having an agricultural advisory board, similar to our other advisory boards in the county. And I've even looked into what they're doing in some other counties, like in Larimer County has a very active board, and a lot of different counties have ag advisory boards. And I was wondering if you have a process for reviewing these leases and making recommendations, and it's, I think, mostly Open Space and Trails staff who are on that review committee you have. And I was wondering if it would be helpful at all to you, or would it be a hindrance if there were an agricultural advisory board who could maybe review ag leases when they're coming up and make recommendations to OST staff as to their opinion on are they doing a good job on operating the leases, and maybe give ideas for how the lessee could do improvements that aren't being done, that sort of thing.
Sure. Yeah, and I know we've talked about it a lot. And the way we've kind of thought about it in open space is first hire the staff who's going to probably manage that group if there is a group, and then see what that workload looks like. And then if we can incorporate some sort of agricultural task force again, or advisory committee. I think we were looking at the ComDev model, but I think they were just looking at structures. Then we would go down that path, but it's in our thoughts. It's just we're not quite there.
I think about it all the time, an ag advisory board, and I mean, I would love to have a work session on it sometime with you and Drew and our board, and toss some ideas around and see if it's something we would want to actually pursue that.
Yeah, I know one of the other things that came out of our policy update was that adding more opportunities for the public to see what these properties are capable of and what folks are doing. And one of the ideas was, in addition to presenting leases to the Open Space and Trails Board, having an additional public session with an agricultural advisory board. So there's just more opportunity. But we just have capacity issues that sometimes we just need to move. So we're doing the best we can now. Once it shakes out and we get a little more settled with this policy, we can go that route and have more opportunities. But as it is right now, we've had our presentations to the Open Space and Trails Board. Right now we're making presentation to you guys with public process, public comment. So I feel like we're covering it, but we'll probably do more in the future.
Kelly?
And then
Yeah.
one other
sorry.
question.
Can I just weigh in on the ag board?
Okay,
Is
sure.
that okay?
Yeah.
Oh, and I just want to put my plug, because it came up for me as it would be really helpful to have some agricultural input on water issues. When we were updating the water plan, it was like a pretty glaring absence of input from Roaring Fork Valley, Crystal River Valley, ag water users as well. So I know that there's some opportunity there to figure out how that topic might fit into any kind of ag board.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, Steve.
So my other question would be, it's been a year now since we have the new agricultural policy in place, and it seemed like it worked pretty good this time. Are there any changes you would see to make to that agricultural policy from a year ago at this point?
I think we nailed it.
First time around, good job.
Adopted it, hired Drew, that was done. But no, I think it's worked really well. You know, we're acting on all these action items. We have this land tenure moving forward with these renewals. When we get to Wheatley, we could talk a little bit more about how that selection criteria worked out. We have a lot more data on our properties for pricing, which makes it a lot more simple. I don't see any edits at this point, unless Drew does. He's been working with it a lot more personally.
It was a really good guiding document for starting to learn this program. So I've been trying to kind of go with the policy and process as much as I possibly can at each of these steps throughout the lease renewal and the open bid process. And I think it is a fairly thorough process that was put in place, so I'm certainly happy with it.
There's another bright green area down there. Is that a different code color?
Over here?
Yeah.
This is Sky Mountain Park.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't, well, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
There is some agriculture over there, but it's mostly Cozy Point South, which is open, which is part of Sky Mountain Park, but really leased by the city of Aspen.
Yeah.
I'll go back to this one to.
And so then once we're done with this, you're also gonna present on Wheatley?
Yes.
Okay. So do we have any more questions or comments?
Good.
So I'm looking for a motion then to authorize the renewal of open space and trails agricultural leases between the BOCC and the Grange family for Emma North, Two Roots Farm for Emma Schoolhouse, South and Mather House, Alex Parker for Glacier, Tommy Wagner for Grace Open Space, and Ty Bertard for Thompson Divide Ranch.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion from Greg and a second from Steve. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Thanks, guys. Good job.
Thank you, that was very clear, yeah.
Okay, and now they're gonna talk to us about Wheatley.
Okay, so Wheatley, well, it's the first public process that we've had with the new policy. So I'll kind of start off with the lease itself. The Wheatley open space lease is 24 acres of Wheatley open space, 21 productive acres, and it comes with 3 CFS on the Wheatley ditch. It was previously leased by Martin & Co. However, this operator has since discontinued production in the area and worked with us throughout this last year to help transition the property. We went through the public bid process for Wheatley Open Space in October of 2022. We had the application available in English and Spanish. However, we did just have English applicants for this. We are trying as much as we can to encourage a diverse group of applicants, and so that was one method that we tried for this first round. We did receive 3 applicants for the property, and so the RFP was issued in early October, and each applicant was required to attend a mandatory site visit at the property with OST. Yeah, so with OST staff. They also had to submit an application by the end of October. These applications were then reviewed by the review committee consisting of 3 OST staff and 1 AVLT, Aspen Valley Land Trust staff. Aspen Valley Land Trust is a holder of that conservation easement. The review committee independently scored all the applications, and then we also did an interview with each of the applicants to clarify any questions that the review committee had and to answer any further questions that they had. So after scoring, after interviewing, the applicants, the review committee unanimously decided on recommending Wheatley Track 2 LLC, which scored highest in all categories for this lease with a 5-year term, contingent upon several of the lease terms being met. So OST staff presented this review committee's recommendation to the Open Space and Trails Board on December 6th, 2022, and it was unanimously approved to put forth Wheatley Track 2 LLC for Wheatley Open Space Agricultural Lease to you all on a 5-year term contingent upon these lease terms being met. So I'm happy to answer any questions. Paul pulled up a map of Wheatley Open Space.
Yeah, I'll show you. So here's Wheatley down here. It's kind of right across from that Conoco, the old Snowmass Conoco. And then when we zoom in, this is what the field actually looks like. This is when it was flood irrigated. When Martin and Co had it, they grew potatoes for vodka, and then put a side roll in. They've since transitioned out, so we're working with this new lessee to put in more efficient irrigation once again when they take over.
For what crop?
It's
Alfalfa.
Yeah,
Crazy,
alfalfa.
crazy.
Yep. Yeah, so alfalfa, it's going to be an alfalfa hay crop, is the crop plan. With the idea here is to rotationally graze the property as well. Since this applicant has adjacent property, they are planning on this land use, and we think it's a good land use. We're just working through the irrigation process and planning right now for this upcoming year. After talking with the previous lessee, it was a bit of a headache, especially growing alfalfa in the field and managing that side roll on the hill. So we're probably looking at least right now, we're probably looking at maybe some big guns. We're kind of in the process of ciphering out what makes the most sense there for the property.
Questions?
Yeah, Steve, I think was first, and then Greg.
So if they are going to be grazing yearlings on there and the fences are long since have been taken out, were they gonna do just a temporary electric fence or install a permanent fence again, or what's the plan there?
So all the fences, one kind of big piece of the RFP and application was that this particular pasture is critical wildlife habitat for winter grazing. So we want to maintain that. And so one key requirement for all fences is that we're going to have our CPW officer out there to approve any sort of fencing that's done on the property. But we also want to see the fence be temporary. So whether it's drop fence or anything else like that, we want to see that for wildlife access on the property.
Greg.
Okay,
Oh, do you have another
one other question. This, who owns the side roll that's on there? Does Open Space and Trails own it, or is it the previous lessee? And what's the plan? Are they giving it or selling it to the new lessee, or what?
They are selling it. I'm not 100% sure if it's the new lessee, but I don't think even if they do sell it to the new lessee, their plan is to use it on this particular parcel. And they're only selling one of the side rolls, from my understanding. I'm not 100% sure on the negotiation there. So that's about all I know about the current side roll that's there. And there's two side rolls. There's one on the smaller pasture, one on the larger pasture.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't make an attempt to purchase it, but
Yeah.
we did not.
And I have really close attachments to the Arbany family who owned that for many years, because we bought one of their other ranches when we moved here. And looking through the whole history on the Wheatley place that you have in the packet was really interesting to me, because it went into the detail, like Laurent and Irene Arbany lived there on the Wheatley place, and that was his area to irrigate with the three brothers.
I think right here.
And Laurent later on was the mayor of Basalt. He lived in Basalt after they left the Wheatley place, but that was really fun reading reading that history, and I've been up to the cemetery a couple of times there. It's really just, the place is just very historic to me, and I was really glad to see that whole report on it.
He flood irrigated it?
They always flood irrigated, everybody flood irrigated
Yeah,
everything
right.
in those days, yeah.
Is that all, Steve?
Mhm.
And Greg?
Yeah, just looking at the scoring on these practices and sustainability, you know, Drew wasn't here in 2019, but we did have kids coming in demand that we declare a climate emergency and climate action. You know, use of the property, use of water resources, carbon sequestration, all those questions kind of come to mind. And, you know, I was just wondering, how do you score it when do you use that lens when you're scoring these? Because the questions that my mind would be, well, beef production I know is water intensive, maybe potato production is even more so, I don't know. It'd be just nice to know what your thought process is as we're looking toward trying to create, you know, sustainable ag and look at carbon emissions and carbon sequestration and water use.
Okay, so yeah, for me, it's a little bit dependent on the property. For this particular property, meeting with previous lessees and them discussing the difficulties that they had with something like a potato crop production. And
That didn't go too well there.
it went well, but it was just really, really intensive. It was intensive on the land, it's intensive on labor resources, equipment requirements, and things like that. And it being such a relatively small parcel, not necessarily the most favorable climate to be cultivating in, at least within the properties that we oversee. And I think looking through that made me kind of think that grazing is a great option for that particular property. I do agree that you know, there are certainly some environmental considerations with grazing, but the one key that I liked about it is that we're not necessarily, it's not just a straight haying operation where they're just continually removing from the property. That grazing can help build soil which is fairly rocky and needs years and years of improvement. And I think that rotationally grazing that property, if it's done properly, and if we can get water distributed evenly on the property, I think we're going to have a real nice pasture down the road and a real nice productive agricultural land. Maybe crops are something that we look at in the future, but at least right now,
you're building soils now.
It is a building soil process there, for sure.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Cattle to improve fields is where it's at for sure.
I think you also noticed that the practices and sustainability is the highest scoring criteria out of all of them. And it certainly takes into account all of these practices that Drew just mentioned. So we're trying to marry all of these things, all of our aspects of our mission, including wildlife and sustainability and agriculture. Sometimes they don't fit neatly, but we try our best to weave them together.
And we're trying to do this on really what's kind of high desert land, you know. Yeah, well, great, thank you.
Patty?
Yeah, you know, watching this property over the years, many years, when we first purchased it and we're looking at it years ago, I think it's, you know, and potato farming is very impactful. I mean, it zaps so much nutrients out of the soil that there's, you know, years you have to lay fallow because of, or change crops because of that. And this is a small parcel. So I think, if anything, it's going to be good for the land, not only, and good for the next door neighbor and landowner. But for me, I'm going to be sad to see those potatoes go because it was fun to watch them grow, especially when they bloomed. I'd never seen anything quite as dramatic as when those potatoes were in
Thinking
bloom.
about vodka.
Yeah. Well, I know they're still growing potatoes in the valley for that vodka. I don't really drink vodka, but that will be missed, but it'll be interesting to see what happens. And there are always a lot of animals, wildlife, grazing that property. So it's something you just can't not look at when you drive by. So I appreciate the fact that, I mean, this applicant did score extremely high. And so I think it's pretty clear that, that they were the best applicant in this case. And it's going to be fun to watch them see what they do with the property. So thank you for putting into process our new process and having it work so well. Thanks, Francie.
Any more comments? All right, I'm looking for a motion then to, for authorizing an agricultural lease of the Wheatley open space between the Board of County Commissioners and Wheatley Track 2 LLC.
So moved.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion by Greg and a second by Patty. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Thanks
Passes
for that.
5 to
Good,
zip.
good
Thank
description.
you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you,
Okay.
guys. Oh, I did have one question for you. Yeah. Do you have an update on what's happening with the building in Emma, since you're in here?
We just had a meeting with our consultant who's doing a public process, interviewing agricultural producers, and all I can really comfortable say is that we are working hard to get recommendations to this board soon.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Paul.
And Patty, alfalfa has beautiful flowers.
Okay, I'll be
I'm just
checking
gonna tell
that
you,
out.
they're
But
purple,
you don't
they're great.
want it to go too far into
That's
their
true.
flowers, so.
I know, but those purple blossoms on those potatoes were pretty awesome.
Just 15%, Paul.
That's right. Never mind.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Drew.
Thanks, guys.
All right, we're now, does anybody need to take a break? Or should we just keep trucking along here?
Let's do a break before we get to the
To
big
the
item.
land use?
Yeah.
Okay.
On pushing.
Did you say you have a question? No. Oh, let's keep pushing. Okay, so now we have individual consideration items and emergency resolution set for confirmatory reading on February 8th. It's an emergency resolution of the Board of County Commissioners approving a grant agreement with the Central Federal Lands Federal Highway Division under the Federal Lands Access Program for funding for the Brush Creek Park and Ride improvements. And I see we have
Linda.
Ryan and Linda. Welcome.
Thank you.
I was gonna ask
Great,
that
well,
question.
just kick it off. I'm Brian Pettit, I'm the Public Works Director. And Linda, if you want to introduce yourself.
Oh, Regional Transportation Director, EOTC. I don't know if this is on.
It,
Red light.
Red light.
Red light.
So,
There we
yeah,
go.
we're here to talk about the Federal Lands Access Program grant that we received. I think we applied for it in 2016, 2017, and we've been working with the federal government since then to try to get this job done. And there have been delays primarily on the federal government side in order to get it done. But in the meantime, we should have signed a grant agreement early on, and we didn't get that done. So that's the emergency nature of this, is to get the grant signed by the Board of County Commissioners so that we can have that intergovernmental agreement authorized. So we do intend to the Federal Lands Access Program folks do intend to mobilize middle of April. And to break ground shortly thereafter, they'll be surveying, clearing, and grubbing, and they'll start the process of completing the project. So we do hope to get it done this summer.
Great.
So Linda's going to pull up a map showing kind of the outline of the project as soon as we're capable here.
Patty, did you have a question first?
Yeah, so we've eliminated the restrooms and the traffic flow part.
Correct. Part of the traffic flow part, and what we're going to show you on the screen as soon as they get it up is the portion that we need to maintain. So part of the entry road, which was the traffic flow part, as you called it, Patty, it needs to be built, because otherwise you're going to go from asphalt to gravel to asphalt again. So we'll just pave that short section into the park and ride.
So we just kind of tweaked that a little bit to bring the cost into a reasonable amount.
Exactly right. So that we are working on that cost right now with the federal government and the contractor, who's out of Rye, Colorado.
Why?
It's pronounced Rye?
The town is called Rye.
Huh. Question?
Yeah.
You know, in 6 years, so much has changed regarding the, you know, the push for electrification. And I noticed there's an article today about the feds offering advice on how to get transportation grants for EV charging The EV chargers down there at that location are substandard, I'd have to say by now, and the demand for more is already here, not just me. But I know we're anticipating this everywhere. And I'm just wondering, is this baked already, or could we possibly go in and look for more federal funding for EV chargers in that location?
I think both is the answer. I think we have money. We're going to be putting the conduit in there to supply about 10% of the parking for EV charging. We just met with Holy Cross on Monday to make sure that they're dialed in, because we're going to have to increase the size of the transformers for that charging effort.
Right.
And then they are putting us in touch with the federal money that would allow those chargers to be installed. So I think that, the next step after we get this project done and the conduits all under the parking facility is to get a charger company involved to install those chargers. That would likely be requests for proposals, that kind of thing, in order to make sure we are competitive.
And the charging companies are actually looking for locations and seeking, advice on where to put them at this point. Auden Schindler, I know, has been working on that with Electrify America, just one, but there are probably several that would be interested. And there's also interest locally that wouldn't it be great if a local company or a group like CORE could be working on the charger infrastructure and collecting the money from the charging rather than the money leaving the valley, as it would with a contractor like that. So there are some ideas like that out there. I'm hoping that we don't miss the boat on those.
We hope not. Yep. We're going to get the parking lot built first, and then shortly thereafter get the chargers installed.
Excellent. Great. Thank you.
Can I just follow up on that a little bit? I do feel like we need to have some conversation related to the degree of emphasis on our role. I really think we need to have a role. I think there's been some tension between is government going to do this? Is the private sector going to do this? I just feel like in all of my conversations related to how money is going to flow, public-private partnership is sort of the path. That's what my takeaway is from all my recent conversations. And so if we need to sort of shore up that position for our board or on EOTC, it may merit having that very clear direction given.
Got it.
So,
thank you.
that's my feeling on it.
We are teaming up with the ski company on installing more chargers at Buttermilk. So that's the Charge America effort that Auden's taken on. So we do have a lot of efforts. And also just on the EV front, we do have chargers being installed at the airport this year, and then also at Public Works.
Great.
And also what, Public Works?
Public Works.
That means we're taking out those extra toaster ovens at the airport, right?
That is facilitated by additional conduit under 82, yeah. We cannot plug them in at the terminal now.
Well, let's take a quick break while they're working on this.
We've got it.
You got it?
Yeah, there you go.
There we go.
Thank you, Abby.
Yeah.
Okay. All righty.
Can we make it that a little larger, please?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. So, as Patty so eloquently put it,
Sorry.
no, that was perfect. This is the Brush Creek Park and Ride. You see Highway 82 in front of it, and we are adding. Right now, we have about 200 spaces that are paved. This paving project would add another 200 spaces approximately on the back side of the existing parking lot. This also includes a repaving of the existing parking lot. The areas in red are the bathroom facilities and the sewer treatment area, or basically a septic field right there. Thank you. The vehicle turnaround, which is the mustard colored area, That's the area that we would be paving to get into the parking area lot, but the turnarounds would not be constructed. Those would need to be made of concrete, and they were much more expensive than we were able to afford. So it's going to be an asphalt project. There'll be lighting and landscaping and all the infrastructure needed for the EV charging and for the sewer system will be installed as part of this project, so we don't have to tear up the asphalt at a later date. So we're doing that as part of this project.
Can you just, I know that concrete's much more expensive. That recycled asphalt that was put down earlier seemed to be a great solution, and it just seems like that, maybe that'll be just fine.
Yeah, I think so we'll pave on top of the recycled asphalt. Some of that will be reused for the site to the right of the mustard color area. Yeah, if you can show that, Linda. Because people do park in there, and that's kind of a mud hole now. So we will be continuing to use the recycled asphalt as we can. There's some coming out of Snowmass this summer, and then we'll be milling up the existing pavement at the site. So that will be reused on site.
And where's the conduit going? Is it just along that front row, or is it throughout? Where is
The
The
EV
EV
parking
yeah.
is right along there.
And we have actually 2 locations. There's 16 spaces going in here and 36 spaces going in down here.
36.
Out of how many parking spaces total?
It's about 400, just over 400.
Well,
so.
you know, this year, EV purchases in Colorado are at about 11% in the last year of all the cars purchased. So and that's doubled almost from 6.5% last year. So the mix for electric vehicles is actually accelerating pretty rapidly, and it's good to keep that in mind as we're putting in charger spaces.
And I believe Andrew said this morning from the power plan, we can put EV anywhere if it's the level 2 spaces and not the DC fast charger ones.
Right.
So we could expand it even further than that.
More level 2s, which
Yeah.
is probably fine in most cases. Yeah.
Yep. Especially in this facility, because people are going to be leaving their cars
For hours. Yeah.
And but we will be installing some of the DC fast chargers for people to charge. I think those, if there's a charging facility that's lacking in the valley, it's that.
Right.
Where people can come in, wait 30 minutes, get a full charge, and leave again.
Right. John could talk about that. You use the fast chargers, right? Yeah. We have a level 2, and yeah, it's a nice more trickle chargers is better than one fast charger that somebody's parked in front of for the day.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so we would limit the parking at that area, that facility.
That's an issue also.
Which requires enforcement.
Well, the people parking and not using the chargers has become an issue.
Yeah.
You see that as the pressure is building with all these new EV owners.
Correct.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
there would be somebody driving through and ticketing, or?
We do enforcement now through the city of Aspen. The parking department does enforcement there. There is opportunity to use the chargers as the enforcement mechanism. So if someone pulls into a DC fast charger, hooks up and leaves, they will be charged a premium
Idle
if
fee.
they're not charging.
There's an idle fee, yeah.
So that could work too.
Right.
Okay.
It'll be automated, I think, by the time we get them in, yeah.
So did you have more to show us, Linda, or?
No, your packet, what we need today is just to get the approval for, to accept the grant. There's a $3,766,672 is our match for the total. And y'all approved that on October 27th EOTC meeting. So that's in our budget for this year. And this is just to formalize the agreement and get your signature on everything.
Do we have any questions?
No, I'll make a motion if you want.
Okay, go ahead and
I
make
make
a
a motion that we approve the emergency resolution approving a grant agreement with the Central Federal Lands Federal Highway Division under the Federal Lands Access Program. What's the acronym for that? For funding for the Brush Creek Park and Ride improvements.
I'll second that with a comment.
Okay,
My comment is, let's get it done.
yes.
We've been talking about this for so long with prices and lack of people submitting requests for proposals or bidding or whatever. Yeah, it's time. This parking lot is well utilized, and I think our plan is to incentivize that use as soon as we get more spaces and more accommodations for people using it. So I think this is a great opportunity, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens when it gets done. As far as the electric chargers, yeah, I think whenever the public sector has the opportunity, but we need to be encouraging the private sector. Sometimes you feel like we're building gas stations out there, and we would not be doing that. So I think we need to remember that this is not just a public responsibility, it's also up to the private sector to come on board.
Okay, I have a motion by Greg and a second by Patty. If there aren't any more comments, let's vote aye if we approve.
Aye.
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 Thank you, guys.
Okay,
Thank you.
passes 5-0.
Don't go anywhere, right? Isn't there another one coming up?
Not for me, for you.
And it is right away because the next one has been withdrawn by the applicant. Do I need to read it anyway?
Do you have to
Short-term rental?
No action. Once the application is drawn, there is nothing to take an action on.
So I don't have to read anything.
Nope, we just moved it.
Okay, so then we're ready for the individual consideration item. This is going to be a public hearing because it's the second reading. This is the resolution of the Board of County Commissioners authorizing the BOCC chair to sign the memorandum of understanding regarding the Roaring Fork Transit Authority 2023 to 2028 regional bike share services. I did see Dan online before, but is he still on?
Is Mirta there?
Yeah, would you promote him? Thank you. There he is. I hear him.
He's carrying on another conversation.
Hear you, but I don't see you, Dan.
I'm trying to turn my video on, but it is not cooperating.
We can take this screen now, too. Thank you.
Well, do you want to talk to us, Brian or Dan, about this?
Sure. We've talked about this before several times. This
Yes,
is
we
the
have.
the bike share
Especially Greg and me.
funding that would go to WeCycle. And I know Mirta was here last time we talked about this at first reading and described really the expansion first to Buttermilk and then ultimately to the Airport Business Center. So I think we have a meeting coming up hopefully soon where we're going to talk more about that. But this is a contribution from the county to really increase the capital for WeCycle, not the operating side, but really to expand the WeCycle capability in Pitkin County. And this is an MOU that's signed off on by virtually all the agencies that are seeing WeCycle expansion right now for the first and last mile for people getting on and off the bus.
And do you want to explain about the amount since it's a public hearing?
Sure, and the amount of $12,637 is included in your, in the county's 2023 budget as part of the budget process. So there, from a budgetary impact, this is really just ratification of budget that's been approved previously during 2023 budget process.
Okay, do we have any questions? Nope. We definitely have seen this quite a bit. So I'm looking for a motion to approve.
The public hearing is.
Oh, yes, it's a public hearing. Is there anybody who would like to comment on this, either online or in the room? I don't see anybody in.
Madam Chair?
Yeah. Yes, Dan, go ahead.
I wanted to slightly amend something that Brian said. For 2023, the $12,637 is intended to help support the operation of Pitkin County's two stations that are located at the BRT station, Up Valley and Down Valley in Basalt. It is really for operation of the system in 2023. In 2024, we would start doing the expansion that he was talking about. I just wanted to clarify that the 12,000 is for operations in 2023.
Thank you, Dan.
And I don't think anybody in the room is here to speak about this item. And is anybody online wanting to speak about it? No. Okay, so close the public hearing and bring it back to the board if there's any more questions. Okay, I'll look for a motion to approve the resolution authorizing the BOCC chair to sign the memorandum of understanding regarding the Roaring Fork Transit Authority 2023 to 2028 regional bike share services.
I'll make
So-
that motion.
I'll second.
Okay. And,
Comment.
okay, go ahead.
Our bike share program here provided by WeCycle has been very successful, and I'm really pleased with that. I know there are other big cities all around the country that have bike share programs, but the one we have is kind of a homegrown one, started by Myrta Mallory, and I'm really pleased that it's been so successful. And I'm really looking forward to when you can go to Carbondale or to Glenwood and hop on a bike there and use it around town, because I oftentimes will go to both those towns on the bus, and I'll walk long distances sometimes to get to where I need errands, and for residents there to get to the RAFTA bus stops to ride the buses.
Any other comments? Oh, yeah, Greg?
Sure, yeah, to add to that, I wanted to say that the WeCycle program, Myrta did her homework and put together something that is very sophisticated. And I've had the opportunity to use WeCycles or systems, bike systems in other countries and in other cities around the country. And I've got to say, I think this system is the best that I've seen. I'm not only because I'm on the RAFTA board, but I'm in this board and supporting it, but I honestly have to say this seems to be the best way of doing it with the docks. The maintenance of the program has been very good. The bicycles are always in great shape. The introduction of the electric bikes has made a huge difference, and ridership is coming up, especially with those bikes. And so as we expand up and down the valley, to have an e-bike you can actually get from one community to the next, that's coming. So it'll be great to see this expand, and it can't happen soon enough for me.
Thanks, Greg.
And it's a much nicer system than the one I saw in Lugano this last year when I happened to visit. I was just comparing it to WeCycle constantly, thinking these people need to come and learn from us. It's how often you get to say that about a European city. So,
I think we have some things going on in our cities. Okay, I'll look for a vote. If you're in favor of this, please say aye.
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 And it passes 5-0. And we will take a short break before the next item.
Do we want to continue the
Thanks,
next
Brian.
item and then
thanks, Linda.
Do I have
Yeah,
to
let's
Next item
continue
is
the
Sent you
next
that
one. and
article I
then-
was referring to. You'll
continue
see-
this
check
and
your
then take
email.
a break?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so,
Thanks, Dan.
thank you, Dan. So now we're on to land use items, and the first one is a resolution granting approval for subdivision exemption for a major plat amendment and lot line adjustment. GMQS exemption for BOCC approved lots and replacement of structures and TDRs. An activity envelope and site plan review for 972 Willoughby Way LLC, WW Colorado Holdings LLC, and Aspen RM7 LLC. And this has been continued from 10/12/22, and it's now going to be continued until 5/24/23. And is that at the request of the applicant? At the request of the applicant. Now what do I do?
Yeah, and it's a public hearing, so we need to open the public hearing and
To
continue
the
it.
continuation?
Since it's on the agenda, you need to open the public hearing.
Okay, so
for
I'll
today.
open the public hearing if there's anybody who'd like to speak to this. Anybody in the room? And anybody online? I don't think so. So do we have to take action on it, or is it
I'd
just
make a
automatic?
motion to continue this to
Okay.
5/24/23.
Second the motion?
Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Passes
Thank
5-0.
you.
Okay.
Question for John Ely. So if it's withdrawn by the applicant, we don't need to take any action, but a continuance in this case, does. in the
Yeah,
meeting.
continuance needs to be moved so that the public hearing can be continued. It doesn't have to be renoticed.
Great, thank you.
And so the public hearing on this one stays open until after the,
Until you close it.
okay.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, is that after it comes back on that future date?
It will be open because it was continued today. And
Okay.
it'll be open on that date until you close it.
Okay, all right, great, all right, now we will take a break.
Have to show you
How
the
much time do you
baby
guys have?
picture.
She's getting so big.
Take a 10-minute break, we'll be back at 1:45.
She's eating cotton.
Welcome back to the Board of County Commissioners regular meeting on Wednesday, January 25th. We are moving on to our land use public hearing items. And we are going to be talking about a resolution designating 2020 or 2211 East Soapers Creek Road Historic Resources to the Pitkin County Historic Register and granting incentives for the designation, including a density bonus for an additional residence and one transferable development right, special review for an additional dwelling unit, and granting activity envelope and site plan review approval to John and Janie Bennett. And I believe Leslie is going to present to us. Hi, Leslie.
Hi. Yes, so just as a reminder, this was continued from your December 7th meeting at the applicant's request. We needed to refine some square footages, and that was added and part of your memo that you got in your packet. The affidavit of public notice was submitted, and it complies with our code. So I'm going to give you guys a brief presentation of the application and the applicant's requests. Susanna Reed, Susanna Reed, who is our Pitkin County Historic Preservation Officer, she will walk through with you the historic resources and the historic interest on the property. And then I'll turn it over to Glenn and his team to make their presentation. So the
Hey, Leslie, you're getting so good at this.
I'm just, no, I'm still so thrilled when it works, you know. The property is located at 2211 East Soapers Creek, and it's highlighted here in a heavy orange boundary. And it's in the RS30 zone district, and it is 51 acres. The property includes a primary residence, and a barn and a blacksmith shed, hog pens and an animal chute, and then some other ancillary structures, and a heritage orchard, which is located in this location. So the ranch was started in the 1920s by James Cartier, and that is according to the Historic Designation Report, which was in your packet. The applicants propose to, and here's a little bit better close-up of just the improvements on the property. So the primary residence is not considered a historic resource. It's been altered enough that it's not eligible for historic designation. But the applicants propose to convert the barn into a second dwelling unit, and then convert the blacksmith shed into an accessory structure, a heated accessory structure. They propose to remove the ancillary structures that have no historic value, and then they also propose to stabilize the animal chute and the pig pens. They are also proposing to locate ground-mounted solar over in this part of the property. The applicants request that the following optional incentives are granted by the BOCC for the preservation of the historic resources. They're requesting a density bonus and a GMQS exemption for floor area for the second dwelling unit, and an exemption from floor area for the accessory structure. They're requesting one TDR to facilitate the historic preservation work on the properties. The applicants propose that the funds from the TDR would be used for the stabilization and the restoration of the two buildings, and that they will, the money will be tracked and audited to make sure that that money goes to the work that is being done on the historic resources. They also request the ability to restore a legal non-conforming structure, which is the barn, because the barn is within the 100-foot setback from East Soapers Creek. So we consider this a legal non-conforming structure, and because it's within the 100-foot setback, they're asking to be exempt from our provisions of that part of the code so they can restore the structure. I do want to point out that they are not proposing to enlarge the footprint of the barn. They're just proposing to create a second floor in the barn.
Could you show us the setback and you've got the floodplain line, but then you have a setback line. I just want to make sure I know what I'm looking at. If you can.
How do I
Well, you zoomed out.
increase the size of this? There we go.
I think I see it. I just want to make sure I know what it is.
Yeah. I can't see the plus button on here. Wait, if we get rid of that. Okay. Ah.
100-foot setback, that
Okay,
dashed line.
that's what I think.
Can you see it,
Yeah.
Steve?
It goes between
I
the
can't
two
see because
buildings.
Steve's standing in front of it, so.
Okay, there you go. You should be able to find it.
Isn't there a button you can push?
We're
Yeah,
trying to
I
push it.
just pushed it. It's working. It's just.
The plus button wasn't on this screen.
Okay, so there's the creek, there's the setback.
Right. So the 100-foot
right-
setback is the heavy black
Actually, that's
dash
the flood-
line, right?
That's the floodplain line.
No, that's.
That's a floodplain, and then the 100-foot setback, like Steve was pointing out, is this,
Light dash.
Dash.
the light dash line there.
Got it.
Yes,
Thank you.
yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, good question. Also, I'm going to leave this one up for you. The applicants are also proposing to put a conservation easement on this side of their property, on this side of the creek. It's roughly 45.8 acres, which is approximately 89% of their property, putting that in a conservation easement. So after my presentation, I'm going to ask Susanna Reed to review the historic resources with you and the historic nature of this property. However, what I do want to point out is, you know, in our code, particularly in the historic designation section of the code, there's a variety of incentives that applicants can request. The applicants are not requesting to extend their vested rights beyond the 3-year standard vesting period. And the applicants are not requesting to expand the size of the second dwelling unit beyond what, other than enclosing, creating a second floor, which adds an additional 75 square feet to the structure. So when the structure is completed, it'll be a total of 841 square feet for the second dwelling unit. Our code provides an opportunity for a second dwelling unit on a historically designated property, and provides that that size of that second dwelling unit could be up to 5,750. Staff finds that the buildings proposed for historic designation meet the standards for eligibility. The property is visible from East Soapers Creek Road. An interpretive sign will be installed at the road to highlight the historic significance of the property, the buildings and their importance in this area of the valley. And the buildings are not proposed to be relocated out of their historic pattern. The Emma Master Plan provides this language to us regarding historic preservation and preservation of the property. And you've seen this language before, but their principal goal is to preserve the dominant agricultural, open space, and rural residential character of the Emma Caucus area, and then to preserve the unique rural agricultural heritage of the Caucus area expressed by the existing historic structures. Staff recommends approval of the optional incentives: 1 additional free market unit and 1 TDR for the preservation of the historic resources. Staff finds that the applicants are not proposing to increase the historic footprint of development on the property. They intend to limit the residential floor area to a maximum of 5,750 square feet. They're conserving roughly 89% of their property with a conservation easement. One of the best ways to stabilize and preserve historic resources is to make them functional buildings. And as stated before, the property is visible from East Soapers Creek Road. Finally, this property is another well-documented representation of an important era in the settlement of the Roaring Fork Valley. Staff does, however, recommend that only the barn, which will be converted to the second dwelling unit, is exempt from floor area calculations. The applicants have requested that the barn and the shed are exempt from maximum allowable square footage. Staff is recommending that only the second free market dwelling unit is exempt. With our recommendation, I have some charts in here, if they're here, maybe they're not.
They're on the right.
Oh, here they are. So this chart is the applicant's proposal as submitted in their application. The square footage is on the property. Here is the barn that is proposed to be converted, and this is the blacksmith shed that is proposed to be converted. There's a root cellar that they are doing some work on, that 59 square feet will be considered square footage on the property. So with the applicant's proposal, they would end up at 4,953 square feet of floor area, residential floor area on the property. And with staff's recommendation, we would end up with 4,112. Again, the difference is that we are not recommending a GMQS square footage exemption for the shed, but we're recommending an exemption for the second dwelling unit. I just also want to point out that I will propose a revision to the reso with regard to the wildfire conditions. The applicants recently had a new wildfire assessment done with regard to the apple orchard. There's 3 trees that are fairly close to the house, and Jonathan Losky went out and looked at the property and found that because of the defensible space around the primary residence and around these 3 trees, that if the limbs that are extending towards the roof are removed, then that's okay, and they don't need to remove the 3 trees. So I would make that revision to the reso when it comes time. Other than that, I'm done.
Excuse me, can I have a question?
Of course.
Leslie, just regarding, I'm sorry, I might have missed something, but go ahead.
We're counting more floor area than they're counting, right?
No.
Or no? Sarah and I both looked at each other like, maybe you can.
My understanding is the proposal requested to exempt the barn and the blacksmith shed from counting floor area. We are recommending that we're only going to exempt the barn and not the blacksmith shed.
So. Hi, Sarah Adams. So on the charts, the larger number is what you're recommending and the smaller number is what we're requesting.
No, that's not right.
Right? We
We're
want less.
requesting that the shed, which is 596, and the number above that, which is 841, which is the barn, both be exempt from floor area. That's what the
Right,
land use
right.
application
So
requests.
then the number total of what's on the property is gonna be.
Right, I get it.
Okay.
I get it.
Why does
I
it
get it.
matter if it's exempt or not, because it's underneath, it's considerably less than the allotted amount that they could have, so why does it matter if we exempt it?
Why it matters, and I'll let these guys talk about further, is originally when we were talking about the application and we pre-app the property, the Bennett's were contemplating an addition to their primary residence. So they were looking, okay, well, what square footage could be exempt and how big of an addition to our primary residence could we do? The addition is not part of this review. It would be a subsequent site plan review if the addition came in. so they're trying to get at where they do, if they do an addition, they do not exceed 5750. So that's why in my remarks I said they do not intend to exceed 5750 on the property with this proposal.
But I thought you said that the second unit was also qualified for 5750.
Could, but they are not proposing to build a second dwelling unit up to 5750. They're proposing in the end total finish 5750
For all the properties.
for all.
So, I'm a little confused, so, I mean, I understand what they're proposing, I just don't understand. If they're eligible for a main house of 5750 and a second dwelling of 5750, why are we worrying about 596 square feet? Because they're nowhere near the two 5,750 square feet added together. I understand what they're proposing, I just don't understand why we have to exempt square footage when they're not, unless there's a future thing that's gonna come in that's gonna then encroach on the, what is it, 12.5 or whatever it is, for the two home, 11.5.
So the original, I think, I'll try and answer this. The original request was to exempt both the blacksmith shed and the barn to give them enough square footage to do an addition, that if those two structures were not exempt, it may exceed 5750
On the second dwelling?
on the addition to their home, when they want to do an addition to their home. If you didn't take away these two structures, then the addition on their home could push them above 5750.
So it's not really about what's being presented today, it's about the future of being able to develop further on the property.
Right. But in reworking the square footage between the December 7th meeting and today's meeting, they believe that they've come to a conclusion that whether we exempt one or the other buildings, and with an addition, they would still be at 5750.
For one
Correct.
house.
Yeah, the distinction is.
I'm sorry.
Slide that down a little bit. Sure, go ahead.
But he needs to come up and be on mic.
Sorry, I'm sorry. In terms of our intent, I might be able to help. To the extent I know what our intent is, I think I could.
This is John Bennett for the record, the applicant.
Hi, and thanks. So we're willing, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it is confusing. We're willing to restrict the entire property to 5750, regardless of the fact that technically we could apply for a second 5750 house on the property. That said, we also want someday in the future, not today, someday in the future when we can afford it, we'd like to add about a 630 foot, we think, expansion on the main house. So at that point, well, we're only looking at a single cap of 5750, and we want to make sure that we can, if you guys give us the approvals that we're looking for, that we can restore and convert the old barn and the old blacksmith shed, and still have enough headroom in there for about a 600 and something square foot addition to our main house, and still come in under a single cap of 5750. That's kind of our overall intent in all this. And we're being a little careful, because I'm saying about 630 feet, because that's the one, rough conceptual drawing that an architect friend did for us. It hadn't been done yet, and we don't know. I mean, it might be a little bit more, a little bit less than that. We just want to be safe, so we're, requesting the exemptions, and, that's it.
That was very clarifying. Patty?
So my question is, I understand that, I got it. But if we go with staff's recommendation, will that put into question your ability to do that 600?
No, it
and
will
something?
not.
So either way, you're still gonna be good.
We could-
So you
we-
can support staff's
We
recommendation?
could live with staff's
That's
recommendation,
okay.
yeah. Thanks.
Thank you.
I'll
Thanks,
retreat
John.
unless you have more.
I just had a question, and I don't know, John, if you want to stay or not. I'm uncomfortable only because it seems like we're getting a proposal that's not fully baked yet, because you've got a proposal for this, but it's kind of contingent upon what you're gonna wanna do next. And I'm just wondering, why didn't you come to us with a plan with perhaps a vesting right or something, so we'd have a picture of the whole thing?
I don't know, why didn't we?
I'm just thinking it'd be easier, to look at it that way. 'cause
This
it-
one seemed
yeah.
like, I mean, frankly, we've been working on this for 2 years, and it was a lot, for us, it was a lot to bite off. And it felt like a bridge too far, a project too far to start working on the 600-foot addition to the house, which we want to do someday, but it's in the someday category. I guess we just weren't quite ready to go that far. Maybe we should have. But they do feel, at least in our minds, they feel like separate projects. They are separate projects. They will both reside under that 5750 cap, but they really, from our perspective, they're quite different things.
Okay.
I don't know if that's helpful or not.
Seems to be pretty normal.
Yeah, well,
We
we
get a
see
lot
we
of
see
those
that
where, like,
happening a
oh,
lot.
I might
thinking,
put a caretaker unit
yeah,
here,
we're
I
gonna
might
build a
do
hotel
this
over here.
barn.
You know, it's like, well,
We haven't brought up the hotel yet. We'll get
okay, thank you.
I have a question about the
very
second
small.
dwelling unit.
I just want to add that there is a condition of approval that in the event that they want to do an addition, they come back, they are required site plan review
To go through it again.
with staff. Not, site plan review does not require BOCC review, but anything that they do also would fall under the historic covenant and making sure that whatever they do still aligns with the historic guidelines of a historic designated property.
Thank you.
And
Thanks.
so I'll get to you in just one second. In terms of the second dwelling unit, it's not required to be a CDU or anything, it's just a second dwelling unit?
That the code provides for a second free market dwelling unit on the property as an incentive.
As an incentive?
An incentive for historic designation.
Oh, my. Okay.
Can you walk us through the criteria, how this meets the criteria for exemption for the barn and? Sorry, thanks. The criteria for exempting the square footage for the barn and not the shed? Please.
Well, one of our thought processes on that was that the code does allow a second dwelling unit. And so we thought, well, if the code is allowing a second dwelling unit, then the code allows a second dwelling unit and allows it to be exempt from growth management. The code's pretty clear about that. An applicant may also request exempt square footage for a historic designated structure. The blacksmith shed is a historic designated structure. So staff is recommending just to exempt the dwelling unit.
As part of the whole package of incentives.
As
we
part
would
of the whole
approve
package of
for
incentives
The
and-
designation,
Yeah.
got it. That one didn't make the cut.
Right.
Got it, thank you.
So the incentives here for historic preservation and designation
Mm-hmm.
are a second dwelling unit, a TDR, and what else?
The ability to restore the barn that is within our 100-foot setback of the East Soapers Creek
As a dwelling unit?
as a dwelling unit. Just the ability to just restore that structure. That's
That is
also,
the second dwelling unit?
that is the second dwelling unit.
And then the blacksmith shed is a wellness studio, it's an inhabitable dwelling with plumbing and everything?
I assume so, yes. Just not a dwelling unit.
No kitchen.
No kitchen.
Okay.
No
You can have
kitchen,
a
no full
bathroom.
bath, none of that.
Okay, thank you.
History.
Oh, Steve, go ahead.
So the blacksmith shop would be maybe an art studio or something, but it would be considered part of their total livable space because it's heated
Yes.
and it's usable for
Yes.
some domestic residential use.
Right, right.
Um,
It's covered, it's enclosed, it's, yeah.
Could you show the structures that are being removed on the map?
Yeah,
I
it's,
think it's the old log structure by the.
it's this structure right here.
Or why don't you just point out which ones? Old log structure?
It's just this
They're-
one.
they're-
Yeah.
they're- It's drawn as one. It's actually two buildings that were mushed together back in the 60s or 70s by previous owners.
Yes. Sorry.
It's a greenhouse. It was a greenhouse.
I'm sorry.
For things that were not 100% legal back in the 60s and 70s.
In many ways.
In many ways.
It has its own history,
It
actually.
has a history of its own. A colorful history.
Do you have more, Steve?
No, that was it for now.
I just had a question. You were talking about Jonathan Losky and a couple of trees, and it sounded like fire mitigation, but then Jonathan Losky was consulting. Did I hear wildfire when it was actually wildlife?
No, Jonathan does both wildfire and wildlife
I didn't
assessments
realize that.
for
Okay.
property owners. And he submitted a revision to the plan, specifically looking at some trees that are right in this area.
Sure, okay.
Betsy?
Yes, Patty?
Trees.
Apple
Are you
trees.
gonna do more about trees? Okay, then I'll ask my questions after I hear what you say about the trees. I'm into those heritage apple trees.
Okay, let's go on. Okay.
Go ahead.
I'd be somewhat brief because I think Sarah has a lot of information to convey, but
Introduce yourself, please.
Susanna Reed, Historic Preservation Officer. This farmstead was likely built by James Carturier in the early part of the 20th century. He and his wife, Berlina, were both immigrants from the Valdosta area and were part of the large, close-knit community that had ranches throughout the Mid-Valley in this area. The two key buildings that we're looking at are the barn and the blacksmith shed, and unfortunately I have to wait for Sarah to give you pictures of those. But they are both in their original locations and very well preserved with only minor alterations. They're both substantial structures, they're both visible from the road, and they're both highly characteristic of the construction techniques of the period. The other thing that we have on this site, which is nice, is there are quite a few remnants of the ranching operation. The pig shed, the animal ramp, and corrals and fences that date back to a similar era. And so the character of the site is still very much in character with the historic conditions that were present when the farm was operating. Let's see. There is an orchard behind the house, and I think there are 10 trees? 17
Whoa.
trees.
Wow.
And Sarah's actually done quite a bit of research into some heritage orchard programs that are existing in the state, and I think I'll leave it to her to tell you more about that. But again, it's kind of, we've looked at a number of these properties, and they all have these characteristics of the ranch house, the accessory buildings, the orchard, this kind of self-sufficient operation in each of these small little farms, but at the same time they were very cooperative. The families intermarried, they shared grazing lands, they shared cattle, they shared techniques, and they shared, workers basically. So this is a really important site in terms of reinforcing that story that is a very strong story for the valley. It really is what sustained the valley between the crash of the silver economy and the emergence of the ski economy. Let's see if I have anything else to say about it. And of course, the ranch is associated with the Carturier family, but also the Cerises, the Gerbas, and the Dawsonys, who all participated in one way or another on this site. So I 100% support the designation of this property to the register, and I think the incentives are appropriate, and I appreciate the way the applicant has taken a very careful hand to looking at rehabilitating the two structures and bringing them back to life. So I will
Can
turn
I
it
ask
over
a
then.
question?
Yes.
So, in light of this, which I think the history is pretty amazing, And looking at the placard, the signage that they're proposing, is there a possibility, like we did with the Bavarian Ski Lodge, of doing something that we can video short, something we can document with the Aspen Historic Society, or something to start cataloging, increasing our catalog?
Yeah, in fact, we had a meeting this morning about this very subject.
I knew it was there, but not really.
Yeah, so we're working on developing our signage program. So we have a consistent signage program that will cover all of our designations. And also we're talking about, as we did with the Highland Bavarian, having additional resources and information on all of this history online, so people can get as deep into it or see, have a bike tour of Italian immigrant ranches in the Mid-Valley, things like that, to really promote the program.
Not that I have any relationship with Italian immigrant families, but yeah, I think would be a great addition to our historic catalog. Thanks, thank you.
I'm so distracted, sorry, thank you. Go ahead.
What features distinguish the blacksmith shed, and do we have other blacksmith sheds in our inventory of historic places?
I'm sure we do. As with many things in this type of ranching context, buildings were used for multiple purposes over time, and as one thing became necessary or another, blacksmith opened up down the street, it might be that use might be converted to a different use. And so I think this probably isn't specifically important as a blacksmith shed. It's just the name that it's been given over time because of some use at some time. I think both of these buildings are significant because of their size. They're substantial in terms of what would have been built at that period of time, and their condition, which is, from a historic point of view, they're in excellent condition.
Steve.
I know of 2 other blacksmith sheds on ranches in the area. One being on Glacier Open Space, the Glacier. Frida Glacier House has a blacksmith shed out behind it. And on the Morin Ranch on Capitol Creek Road, they have a blacksmith shed that was used specifically for that because they were, shoeing their own horses, doing their own metal work, and that sort of
And there was
thing.
one at Bob Harris as well. There was one at Bob Harris as well back in the day.
Probably on a lot of the ranches, there were blacksmith sheds.
And I think in terms of Glacier, just because I've been looking into that lately, that was probably one of the original homestead houses that later became the blacksmith shed. So there is a real evolution of uses, everything goes to use. So I think I should also reinforce that the ranch house on this property is still in part existing on the property, but it's been incorporated into the new construction of the house that's there now, so that's not part of what we're talking about in terms of the designation.
Thank you.
I have some other historical context that I think John Bennett would be particularly interested in. Back when I was in high school, I was told by Henry Ray, who lived in Basalt on 2nd Street, that the Nicholson place, he called it the Cartier place. The Nicholson place that your cousin owns. And that's the only time I ever came across that name Cartier, until I read this packet, and I'm sure it was the Carturier place. And it mentions in the packet that Berlina Carturier family homesteaded in the Snowmass Capitol Creek area, didn't specify where, but I think it'd be worth checking with
That's fascinating.
Gar about
follow that up.
Carturiers possibly owning or leasing that place that they have up there. Because I'm sure that's probably the place where Berlina came from, was the Nicholson place.
Interesting, thank you.
Sarah, are you gonna say something to us?
Glenn's gonna go first.
Hi, Glenn.
Thank you. So, I'm Glenn Horn, representing John and Janie Bennett, who are here. And you know John and Janie as longtime Roaring Fork Valley residents. Sarah Adams is going to do the historic designation discussion. We've got a slide before you that shows the location of the property, which Leslie's been through already. I'll point out that the road to the north here is Dry Creek Road. Here, this is Dry Creek Road, and this is Bear Ridge Road. The land that's shaded in brown is BLM land, and you've got about a mile from West Cypress Creek to the site. So what we're going to do is I'm going to run through the existing conditions. Sarah's going to go through the historic designation. I'm going to address consistency with the two adopted master plans, compliance with the code. Leslie's touched upon that. We do have some good letters of support from neighbors and the caucus. I want to address the applicant's commitments to ensure consistency with the master plan and commitments associated with the TDR request. Looking at the existing conditions, Leslie's touched upon this. You've got Dry Creek Road here on the north, Bear Ridge Road to the south, and East Cypress Creek Road to the east. Irrigated pastures on the west side of East Cypress Creek, another irrigated pasture next to the road. This area up on the hillside is all dry land. It goes up towards Dry Creek Road and Bear Ridge Road. This area is known as Section 36, and it's critical deer and elk winter range. Down on the valley floor, you've got the improvements between the two roads and on the east side of the creek. Here are some great photos of the property that give you a sense of what it looks like. This is up towards the dry ridge. Another photo that you can see from, it's from the Dry Creek Road looking at the barn. Here you see some of the ruins with the barn in the background. This is from Dry Creek Road looking towards the blacksmith shed here and the barn. And then this presents an overview of the existing structures. You've got the Bennett house here, the blacksmith shed, the barn. These are ruins, the tack room, livestock ramps and corral, the hog pens. These are the two sheds that are not historic that will be removed. And it's important to mention the apple orchard, the heirloom apple orchard. These trees are over 100 years old, 17 trees, and they're in good shape and they're very productive. This is the survey that Leslie pointed out to you, and I think the key thing is this line here is the 100-foot setback line. And you can see these ruins here, the corrals and hog pens, and these ruins are within the 100-foot creek setback, as is the barn. And the point here is that we're not making any expansion of the footprint within the 100 creek setback. Looking at the land use request, we're seeking activity envelope and site plan review approval for a ground-mounted solar array, on-site wastewater treatment system, minor expansion of the primary residence some point in the future. John and Janie really hadn't thought that out yet, but they want to reserve floor area for that minor expansion. And we're proposing a limit of 5,750 square feet of floor area on the parcel. The second part of the land use request is a density and floor area bonuses to convert the historic barn to a single family house that will have 841 square feet of floor area. The second land use request is a TDR floor area bonus to convert the historic blacksmith shed to an accessory structure. That would be 596 square feet of floor area. we're requesting the issuance of a TDR, and there are some unique limitations that we're placing upon the TDR. First, all the funds associated with the sale of the TDR would be used for the preservation of the historic resources, as well as the on-site capital facilities improvements that are necessary to serve those resources. In other words, the funds could be used for the septic system or water storage system that might be necessary for the historic resources. Any funds that are not used for the historic preservation effort would be conveyed back to Pitkin County to be used for, hopefully, for historic preservation. We had the Emma store in mind, but if there are leftover funds, they could be used for anything of the county's choice.
Can I just quickly ask, leftover after how much time?
Leftover after, I would say, after we get a CO for the historic structures.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, I see.
Within
So
6
not
months.
a continuing maintenance, just the original.
It's just for the
reconstruction.
capital
Construction,
construction.
however long
Okay,
that
thank you.
takes.
And, we're aware of the concern over where TDRs go, so we're proposing a limitation on the TDR receiver sites, in that normally the 2,500 square feet associated with the TDR could go anywhere in the county. We're proposing to limit the landing sites to within the urban growth boundary or the pre-approved subdivisions in the county. There are 8 of them that are pre-approved as TDR receiver sites and don't require special review. In other words, the TDR that comes off of this property would not be eligible to go anywhere in the county where a special review is required. So it couldn't land in some other rural part of the county, only in the urban growth boundary and the pre-approved receiver sites.
Excuse me, can I ask, how can you specify that as the seller of the TDR? Once the TDR is severed and sold to somebody, how can you dictate what
It'll
they
be
do?
written right into the certificate that they can only be used within the urban growth boundary.
So this is
or
a
on
new
those
category
pre-approved.
of TDR.
Excuse me?
It's kind of a new category of TDR.
Well, there are TDRs that have had conditions. I ran across one that I'm working on, and was on Edgar Stern's old property, Ziff's old property in Starwood, where there were limitations about the quantity of floor area that would be associated with that TDR. What we've tried to do is look at the concerns that we've heard at this board about TDRs, and try to kind of customize the way the TDR receiver sites would work before the commissioners get to the point where they make some changes to the system. So that's what we're trying to do.
And that will hold water legally. A purchaser of this TDR won't feel that they got shortchanged.
It might affect the price of the TDR, is what I would imagine.
The restriction, Greg, is ours. It's not the seller or the recipient of the original TDR.
So we would put that restriction on it.
And we've done that, as Glenn mentioned, actually
Okay.
quite a few times.
All right, thanks.
If there are no questions at this point, I'll turn it over to Sarah. I'm going to come back after Sarah addresses the historic designation.
Switch seats.
I'll
Thank you
switch
for the
with you.
clarity of those requests. Glenn.
Page display. Where's the full screen? There we go. Okay. Hi, I'm Sarah Adams. Thanks for having us. So I'm just going to discuss the importance of 2211. I'll add a little bit to what Susanna Reed said about the relationship of this important property to Pitkin County's history and the regional history. One of the largest and most important ranching and farming communities in Pitkin County came from the northern mountainous regions of Italy, known as Val d'Aosta. You've heard me talk about this many times at
We
this
have.
point, but in case someone's watching that's interested, I'll be quick. And before I go into this, I do provide all of these designation reports and any history that's not included back to the Historical Society. So we have a pretty good back and forth about sharing all the information that I can randomly find in the census data and things like that. So the Clavel and Wagner families came to the Roaring Fork Valley in the early 1880s. They sent word back home to Italy about the opportunities in the Mid-Valley, and they actually sponsored people to come over and settle in Woody Creek, Emma, Old Snowmass, and Basalt. Probably in Carbondale as well. I just haven't gotten that far in my research. They supported each other within the community, like Susanna said. The terrain and the climate was really similar between northern Italy and the Roaring Fork Valley, which I think gave them a leg up on homesteading and being successful as ranchers. So the Austin community established farms and ranches, and they began producing food that supported the surrounding communities and beyond. They actually shipped potatoes out to California in return for grapes to make wine. I mean, there's really a neat history out there of this kind of back and forth that was happening, at the turn of the century and into the 1920s and 30s and 40s. So here are some of the Austins. And on the right is a potato cellar that's across the street from the property that we're talking about. And I think this is just really important. This isn't on the Bennett's property, but this is just some of the remnants from the settling and the homesteading and the ranching in this neighborhood.
While you're on that, I saw that
Sure.
on the map. Whose property is that on, and what's going to happen to that?
It's right here.
Petrox?
The Petrox.
Oh, it's the
farm.
Petrox?
Yeah. So the
We are.
So their house is just up from that?
Down.
That
Down.
big
Just
house?
down from
Oh,
there.
that makes that way clearer for me
Okay.
about where it is, okay.
Yep, so here's the potato cellar. So among this group is the Carturier family, and I've seen it spelled a million ways, which makes the research really hard. But when they naturalized, it was Carturier, so we'll go with that. Carturier. So they had, the Austins had a lot of French names, but they identified as Italian, sometimes Swiss, depending on how they were feeling when they registered for the census. So James and Berlena were the head of the household for this property. James started ranching here in the early 1920s, probably earlier. I found newspaper articles mentioning him ranching here, but it probably happened before the 1920s. He and Berlena were both immigrants in the Val d'Aosta region. They married in 1925. They had 2 daughters here and raised them here, Stella and Pauline. Berlena Carturier made cheese, bread, sausage, wine on the ranch. She tended a huge garden. I don't know if it's the same place that we see the garden now or not. It's pretty impossible to figure that out, but she had a huge garden. She sounds like she did kind of everything, and she likely planted the apple orchard. If not, she definitely tended it. The Carturiers sold the ranch in 1949 to Mella and Joe Cerise, N.A. Dossigny, who is the son of the Dossigny residents that you designated a few months ago on Emma Road, and M.J. Russo. Mella owned an adjacent ranch at the time, so it kind of made sense. They were already sharing cattle, and so they were able to share the property as well. In 1966, Charles and Margaret Smith purchased the ranch from the Cerise family. Yes, that's Max Smith's parents. I talked to him about this property a little bit. He spent some of his childhood here. He said in order to, I don't know how he said it, stay out of trouble, he milked cows in the barn and then sold the milk out of the Emma school bus, which I thought was kind of interesting. So that was his tidbit. And he's the one that said that the hog pens, when we get there, were used for hogs or calving and kind of whatever animals they needed to put in there. So I'll walk you through the different aspects of the property that we're proposing for designation. So the blacksmith shed is pictured here, and I included a map at the bottom on all of these slides to kind of orient you to where these buildings are located. We think this was originally a foundry and a blacksmith. Obviously, they're pretty high need when you have cattle to be self-sufficient and have a blacksmith shed on your property. As Glenn and Susanna and Leslie all mentioned, this building is easily visible from the street. It has a dirt floor, and really the only alterations are those 2 lean-to additions, one on the front and one on the back. And they were, I think, in the period of significance of the construction of this building. It's a hand-hewn log cabin construction. which takes a lot of time and a lot of technique to make that happen. I think it's pretty clear to anyone, even without a historic background, that the utilitarian and practical style and design of these buildings represents early ranching history of Pitkin County, which is recognized as important, not just by the caucus, but in the historic preservation program that you have. And as we discussed, this shed's proposed to be adapted into a usable space. So here's the barn. And this barn was originally built by the Carturiers. It was mentioned in Belena's obituary that she built a barn on the property, so I wanted to just mention that. It's a similar style and vintage to the blacksmith shop, obviously. There's no alterations. This also has a dirt floor. It's located just behind the blacksmith shed, which you see here, also easily visible from the street. These two buildings really establish the historic context of the property. They're enhanced by the accessory historic elements that I'll talk about in a minute. But as Susanna Reed also mentioned, that the blacksmith shed and the barn are really the kind of cornerstone of why this property is important. I think that's what the public will understand, that's what the public can see, and the fact that these have barely been altered is a huge opportunity to reuse them in a way that's consistent with your design guidelines rather than trying to undo things that have happened over the past couple decades.
What do you do with them now?
Right now, is it storage?
Miscellaneous storage,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, this is the kind of the hayloft that I climbed up there, the ladder. It's pretty cool. Okay, the pens. Okay, this isn't a chicken coop, but the hog or the calving
In fact,
pens.
both topographically and conceptually not far from it.
But they are an agricultural artifact. They're proposed to be stabilized to prevent further deterioration. They had wood and sod roofs similar to what you saw across the street at the potato cellar that's a little more intact. But obviously the roofs have caved in. On the downhill side towards the creek, there's still the doors. A lot of the workmanship, the texture, the local materials that were used are clearly still evident. Now stick with me. The preservation of the hog pens is actually really important to the context of the site. It's a tangible representation of ranching and farming life. Now we're not asking just to designate these and nothing else. It's part of a whole package deal. It's about creating the context of what a ranch was like back in the day. And Steve, maybe, and Francie and Susanna, you know if there's other pens like this that are still existent. I would imagine a lot of these have just kind of gone back to the earth, or they've been replaced with more modern farming equipment and sheds and things like that. There's something to be said for the amount of time it took to drag the trees and to make this artifact useful on this property.
Boy, I wish the first ranch that our family had bought was in Pitkin County. There were a lot of stuff like that.
Yeah, it's hard to find now, though. It really is. I mean, I'm looking for it, don't get me wrong. My family's pretty sick of me driving around looking for this stuff, but it's pretty hard to find it intact like this. In the proximity of the pens to the barn, which is here in the blacksmith shed, and the corral and the livestock ramp and things like that, it creates this compound that's so important for people to understand in the apple orchard that I'll go into. It's all part of creating a more holistic story than historic preservation 20 years ago that was just about the main building. It's about all the pieces that kind of create the story that people in future generations, it really resonates with them more than just here was the main house where they lived. So the livestock ramp and the corral, I mean, they're pretty self-explanatory. They're located just next to the barn, kind of between the pens and the barn. And similar to the hog pens, the ranching artifacts are really quickly disappearing through the valley. I mean, especially the ramps are pretty hard to find in our area that are wooden, at least from what I've seen. The Bennetts also found an old a branding iron fire pit by the corral that's still there. And it's really about creating, like I said, this holistic story, having an authentic ranch And I think that these accessory pieces add to that story and add authenticity to what Pickens County is preserving. And these would be clearly photographed. I mean, these photographs are beautiful, but pictured and documented on the interpretive sign, so that when you're going by, you actually understand the whole picture. They're a little harder to see, but it is part of the story. The apple orchard. Oops. So this apple orchard is estimated to be about 100 years old, and that's pretty amazing. I've been doing some apple orchard research since 2250. It's my side gig right now. I'm just really interested in what the apple orchards, the connection of the orchards within the Mid-Valley here, and what that means to our history. So there's 17 apple trees. They're planted in pretty much 2 formal rows, here and here. They're still producing.
They look a lot more viable than the other one.
Than the other ones, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, these, I mean, the pictures, I mean, look at those apples.
Yeah, no
It's
kidding.
amazing.
Well, look at the
Making
shape
my
of the
mouth
trees.
water.
They're not all distorted.
Yeah, they're not, yeah, they look much better cared for. You know, there's a rich history of apples from this time period. These survived Prohibition, when the federal government was coming through and just cutting down anything that could be made into alcohol.
God.
I don't know if that happened in Pickens County, but somehow our apples survived. You know, these likely could have been seeds that were brought over from Italy. There's a nonprofit that is cataloging historic apples throughout Colorado. They received a state historic fund grant a few years ago. And so we're going to register this orchard, the orchard at 2250, to, because right now there's nothing in Pickens County. Apparently we have no apple trees. And the nonprofit can come out and actually do genetic testing if the owner wants, and really start to participate in what some of the historians are trying to make these connections of where the apples came from and the different strains that could be going extinct, and really try to preserve that part of our history. So this would be a part of that project. Okay, this is my last slide.
Are they doing apricots as well?
That's a good question. I've been so focused on apples. I can send you a link.
You're the apple expert, okay.
Yeah, but I think it said fruit trees, but it's more about the apples from what I've read.
Can I jump in on the apples? And maybe somebody can correct me, but Lazy Glen Open Space, I thought they were trying to bring back some historic heritage apple trees on that site. I'm not sure.
Okay.
There's a little plot there. Also, if you look with a satellite view plane of this subdivision that's between Rosebud Cemetery on Old Highway 82 and Berthod Motors, you can track where it looks like spacing of an old apple orchard, and mixed in there are apricots and plums and pears. But my daughter has 2 of the apple trees on her property on South Grand Avenue that are kind of, if you look overhead, you can see where they would have lined up. So I'll fill you in on
Yeah,
more information,
please
because
do.
that's another site.
Yeah, that'd be
And both
great.
of her trees are big producers of apples.
That's great.
Bottom of Prince Creek Road too, there's huge old apples.
Yeah. So I'll fill you in on that one.
Thanks.
But that's why the apple thing, I think, it's valley-wide.
Mhm.
And the fact that these are over 100 years old and still producing as well as they are is just incredible. It shows you the fortitude of the old
Right.
apple tree.
Exactly. And what a great way to experience history. You know, visually, you can taste it. Like, it's all about, you know, all the different ways to tap into history and have it resonate for our younger generations to want to continue to preserve.
Right. And then what do you do with all of those apples?
We have done different things in different years. We've donated, we once had a whole, oh, sorry. We've had students from the Aspen Community School come over and pick them and sell them. We make an enormous amount of cider that we give away, and we have invite a lot of neighbors and friends over. We have not commercially sold them so far. We toy with that idea. We haven't gotten it. We just haven't done that. But we try to find homes for them.
Homes,
And
apple
some
homes.
years it's a challenge, and we're not alone in our interest in the apples. We have, this year we had a mother bear and 2 cubs very interested in the apples. So we have a relationship with the bears, and we do what we can. There are a lot of ground drops. We try to rake them up and put them on the path the bear uses to come in, so the bear stops there instead of
Getting in the
climbing up
tree.
and destroying the limbs. So we're trying to work with a bear. We establish a working relationship.
When I was actually growing up in Southern California, we had friends that had apples up in the Lake Arrowhead area, and we used to go up. It was at Sanchez Village, and we used to go up and shake the trees, put them on tarps, and make apple cider. And God only knows how many worms and stuff. But we just ground it up, and it was wonderful.
We just don't think about that.
You don't. You just drink it and be merry.
I'm Janie Bennett, the other part of the applicant. I also would like to add that we have given ACES their property down valley, given the apple pulp to for them to use for their creatures there.
Oh, yeah.
And secondly, let's see, I had one other thought about apple uses, because an interesting question. Let's see. Oh, no, I wanted to refer to, we have an old press that is made by one of the last apple press, wooden apple press
The hand
makers
crank.
in the,
That's what we did.
in the country. Yeah, yeah. So.
And you don't make alcohol, right? Because we don't want the feds
Very
coming in.
I don't know why.
Thank you. Sorry to diverge from.
Full disclosure, I picked apples there and made apple juice, and I never once saw any alcoholic beverage.
You went on the wrong day.
Do you have a species name for these apples?
They're old growth Jonathans, we are
Oh,
told.
are they?
Yeah, yeah.
Very cool. Very cool.
I wonder if
Try to
they're
graft them at
related
all?
to the ones
Sorry,
on
we have
Avalanche.
done grafts, yeah.
Have they taken? Yeah.
Who did, refresh my
So
memory?
Jerome
That's right, that's
Ostenkowski, many years ago, took grafts for, I believe, a community orchard that was created in Mid-Valley somewhere.
I wonder if that was the one at Lazy Glen.
Well, then Lazy Glen very recently have actually come, we gave them just full access to the orchard to graft for their newest project. But Jerome had a project going, almost 15 years ago, and I have to
Anybody
follow.
can grow anything, it's that man.
Yeah, right. Yes, yeah.
I wonder if they're related to the trees at Avalanche Ranch, the ones out in the sheep pasture.
They can genetically
And if we do
determine.
this genetic testing, that this
Right.
new,
We'll have to talk.
inventory, historic, what do you call it? The thing we're signing up for, whatever it is.
It's the state heritage apple organization.
Right,
Yeah,
exactly.
it has a Montezuma Orchard Project, I think
That's
is what it's called.
So with their genetic testing, we hope to answer some of those questions.
Yeah,
Be
it's really
interesting,
neat.
Yeah.
Okay, so to wrap up the historic part of this, let's see, where was I? I'll just conclude. I think you have an idea as to how important we think the property is. It's over 100 years old. It is a very high level of integrity, as Susanna Reed mentioned, visible from East Soapers Creek Road. We are proposing an interpretive sign. It'll link it to the other Austin ranches in Emma. This also aligns with the master plan that Glenn will talk about and Leslie already touched on. And the adaptive reuse of the two historic structures, the barn and the blacksmith shed, really is the best way to protect these buildings moving forward. It allows them to have another life. As Susanna said, they've had many lives up to this point. And just putting in a proper foundation, waterproofing and all of that will make sure that the high level of integrity remains moving forward for another 100 years.
Okay.
And while the barn and the blacksmith shop are easily explained as historic, I think, the accessory historic elements of the property really provide a rich history and a comprehensive representation of the valley life at the time. So I ask you to keep your minds open to those pieces of this project and what we're proposing to preserve, because I really do think that there's a huge opportunity to include those as part of the story on this property. So thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Glenn?
That was I had a thank you slide. Oh yeah, with Mac, I have to show that. I always, when I talk to, past people that have lived here, they always give me photos when they were little. And I tell them I'm going to share this in the public hearing. So here's Mac with his fish, and here's Mac maybe shooting a BB gun or something on the property.
That's why he needed something to keep him out of trouble.
Exactly. Here's some cows.
That is so cool.
There are some bullet
So,
holes in the roof.
another historical tidbit, if you are going up Lower Snowmass Creek, you cross the bridge and look on a little island in the middle of Snowmass Creek. There is a little lean-to shack thing out there that was built by Mac Smith and my brother Doug and Dexter Lemoy when they were probably in 5th or 6th grade. They built that, and it's right there next to the raging river, and it has survived for years and years sitting there.
On the left side when you cross the bridge, or the right side?
On the left, after you cross the bridge going up, look down into the creek, and there's a little island with a little shack that was built by Mac and my
So that
brother.
was either keeping them out of trouble or getting them in trouble.
Amazing it hasn't been washed away.
Yeah.
Yeah. Kelly?
Do you have any renderings of what the preservation will look like in the end?
Do you have elevations of what?
No, we
I
don't.
mean-
The structure will be exactly the same from the outside, except it'll be preserved and restored. There are no changes to the look,
There's
other
a-
than
Susanna, do you
the
want to
dormer.
address that? Or I can if you.
You know, just like the hog.
There-
Well, the hog shed and some of the other remnants, I think it's gonna be a matter of getting out there and figuring out the best way to stabilize that. Usually, with stabilization projects, whatever kind of intervention we do is not visible from the outside. So essentially, what you see now, it would just be stabilized to prevent the walls from caving in, or any other further damage.
So there won't be
due
like a
to-
roof replacement on the
No.
hog sheds or?
No, for a stabilization project. So it's just kind of
we have.
trying to hold that in place.
So we have talked, now, we would do absolutely nothing without, I want to say this on the record, without your approval. But we did talk about possibly, if we could, I don't even know if it's feasible, but if we could, trying to restore one sod roof just to get a sense of what it looked
Yeah,
like.
which would be amazing because the whole sod roof detail is something that's disappearing from
We would love to
almost
do that.
everywhere in the valley.
Yeah.
That's existing now, yeah.
Part of a sod roof is existing now. One is caved in, one is just the very last remnants of it are still in place. And, yeah.
Thank you.
Hey, Glenn?
Yeah, so I just on a personal note, I called Mac yesterday because he's a friend of mine, and told him that this was going on, and Mac said, he lives on Bear Ridge Road above this property. And he said every time he drives by the property, it just brings a smile to his face to see it there. And I told him about the hearing today, and he wished us well. But it's kind of cool to think that his place would be preserved, because he is an important character in the valley, bringing us Highlands Bowl and everything that he's done. Another personal note is I've walked twice now with Alice the Hope route on the ridge above the Aosta Valley. And it's just unbelievable. We've done this in the past 4 years. Just how much we like it and the similarities there are to Pitkin County and the places that we hike here. So I kind of understand the connection for why these families migrated here, and we certainly understand the appeal of the mountains in the Alps and the similarities to here. But
So I
anyway.
have a very important question on that. Have they figured out how to grow tomatoes?
What's that?
Where? In Italy?
Oh,
We'll let Laura down.
I don't know.
Ask Sarah if have you been there?
I wanted to go, but I got vetoed by my family.
Oh, I think-
So we went to Switzerland, and I was like, "We're so close." And
I think you need to go.
it's on my list for sure.
Well, and the other local Italians, the Matallones and Caparellas, they tended to come from Sicily, so we don't ask what their family background was. They came over here for mining. So.
Yeah, a lot of the southern Italians came over
Yeah.
for mining, and the
Yeah.
northern for ranching.
Okay, so moving on with the presentation, let's see, we can do the Emma master plan in terms of the consistency of the application with the Emma Caucus master plan. Leslie touched upon this. It calls for supporting historic preservation, encouraging property owners to list their structures on the historic register, and it calls for working with property owners to find solutions and incentives for the preservation and adaptive reuse of structures. The proposal is really consistent with this plan. If you look at the Down Valley Master Plan, the plan calls for development to be clustered by the roads and to recognize the agricultural and wildlife lands and try to preserve those lands and try to minimize conflicts with agricultural land and wildlife. And like, you know, many of the land use patterns that you see on ranches, the ranchers put their structures, their houses, their facilities in the logical place by the road. They avoided the irrigated pastures and they avoided the wildlife lands. So that's what we're doing with this proposal. Looking at the TDR commitments, and we worked really hard on this, and we think these are unique commitments in the TDR program, and that we're committing to use the funds to preserve the historic structures and the capital facilities that would serve those historic structures. Funds not used will be donated back to the county, as I mentioned before. We'll limit the places where the TDRs can land to within the urban growth boundary, and the pre-approved county pre-approved subdivisions, there are 8 of those. And we think, you know, this is trying to diagnose the concerns that we've heard about the TDR program and coming up with a proposal for some solutions. The conservation easement, we're proposing to encumber 89% of the parcel, all of the elk winter range in a conservation easement. And the conservation easement offered here fosters conservation in the valley due to the links with other land in the valley. If you take a look at this slide, this is the East Cypress Creek Valley. This is the Bennett parcel. These blue dots, which don't show up very well on here, but you can see them now, that's the critical winter range, and you can see the Bennett parcel above the ditch is all within that critical winter range. And then you look at the public lands, the BLM land in brown, and then there's the 500 acres or so of the Timroth property, which we worked on in the past, Suzanne and I, and this is all Pickens County open space now. And that links up to the Shelkoff parcels 1 and 2, which are in a conservation easement. And then immediately adjacent to the Bennett property, you've got the Flat Bush Farm conservation easement. So this wouldn't be a random conservation easement. It kind of helps contribute to the pattern of conservation in the East Cypress Creek Valley. Other commitments, the applicant commits to install a ground-mounted solar array by the road, and they'll commit to utilize renewable energy for the historic structures. In fact, 100% of the energy for the structures will be from the solar array, and it would be linked to the electrical system in the valley.
Question. Just the new structures. What about the existing structures?
Oh, go ahead.
But that's the historic structures.
Well,
not the new structures.
Well, the ones you're talking about here. What about the house? Is the house on gas? Is it electric?
So right now, it's gas and electric. All of our electric is 100% renewable, purchased from Holy Cross. We are actively getting, when we do that little 600-foot addition that I described, we want to convert the house 100% to all electric. The new structures in the old historic buildings will be all electric and 100% renewable from the beginning. We're absolutely committed to doing the old house as well. We haven't quite gotten there yet. We're exploring it.
Got it. Great. Thank you.
The applicant commits to that the water rights will stay with the land and won't be sold. With respect to property taxes, right now, the property is eligible to be assessed for agricultural purposes. John and Janie have not pursued the agricultural tax assessment. It's assessed for residential purposes, and they'll commit to keep it in the residential category in the future.
Can I ask why?
We don't feel we're not making our income from agriculture. And we think that's what the ag exemption was originally created for, to help farmers, frankly. We're not. I mean, we're growing a lot of vegetables, and we have animals grazing on our land. Previous owners of our land all had an ag exemption on it. When we bought the land, we let it lapse, and we've never reapplied. We just don't feel,
You don't want to run cows.
this is
or
very
sheep or
old-fashioned.
something.
We don't mind paying taxes. So there you have it.
Can I further that to ask the county attorney? So the acreage, which is significant for the conservation easement, can that be taxed differently than the residential section of the property?
The tax classification, it's actually not an exemption, it's a classification. The classification is based on the actual use. In some instances, like a classification for agricultural, you have to apply for it and demonstrate the use and the attempt to make profit through the products of your endeavors. But it's driven by the actual use of the property, not.
But there's no
not an overlay
classification
of
for
a-
conservation easements as far as taxation?
No, there's not.
Because that would be something worth thinking about. So people might have more incentives to do conservation easements. That's not the case now, but I just thought I'd ask the question. So sell a lot of apples and come back and talk to us.
So, moving on, in terms of support, there is support from the Emma Caucus. They've written a letter in support of the project. Tim Brown, the most immediate neighbor, wrote a letter, and I'll quote a section. He says, "I fully and enthusiastically endorse the site plan submitted by John Bennett." Tom and Jody Cardamone wrote a letter of support. Tom and Jody wrote, "I like that the proposed plan would keep the restored barns the exact same size as they are today. I'm also encouraged by the Bennett's desire to create a conservation easement for most of their 51 acres, which is used by a great many deer and animals." And then finally, George Newman wrote a letter, and we all know George's feelings about the TDR program, and he writes in his letter, "The Bennett's innovative approach to the use of a TDR could set a new precedent in the granting of TDRs for historic designation. The granting of TDRs should not be a moneymaker for the applicant, but rather an incentive to preserve historic structures throughout the county. The Bennett's commitment to donate any unused monies after all the work has been done represents an innovative approach for further historic designation applications." So I want to summarize by looking at this package of commitments that John and Janie are making. What we tried to do is come up with, an overall package that addresses county concerns and is consistent with the county code and the county adopted plans. They're proposing to preserve and occupy 2 of the historic structures with no change to the footprint. They're proposing to stabilize the other historic resources on the site and preserve the historic heirloom apple orchard. We've talked about installing an interpretive plaque on the road in a location that would be where people can stop and see the plaque and see the barn and the blacksmith shed. That road is heavily traveled by bikers, and it would be easy for them to stop and take a look. All proceeds of the sale will be used to preserve the historic resources and capital facilities that serve those historic resources. Funds from the TDR sale not used will be donated to the county for historic preservation or any other use. Floor area from the TDR sale would be limited to receiver sites in the urban growth boundary or pre-approved subdivisions. There would be no floor area added on random rural sites that need special review approval. The conserved land fosters the goals of the Emma master plan and conserves land in the East Cypress Creek Valley. 89% of the parcel would be encumbered in the conservation easement consistent with the other lands in the valley. The applicant will install a ground-mounted solar array and use 100% renewable energy for the historic resources. Water rights will stay with the land, and the applicant will not seek an agricultural tax assessment. And that kind of wraps up the presentation. We can take questions. Here's a beautiful shot that Janie took of the barn with just a dusting of snow.
Okay, Steve, then Patty.
So, the part that's the critical elk and deer winter range, is there a fence going around the perimeter of the property there?
No, there's not.
Fence has been removed or the
Okay,
property line isn't?
There is the remnant, we've used the word remnant a lot in this meeting. There's a remnant of a fence you can see up that, matter of fact, in the back of that top left of this image, our property goes up to the top of that hill. If you walk up there through the sagebrush, you can see the remnants of old wire fences.
I would like
There's
that,
not much left.
as a condition, that if there are any remnants of old barbed wire fence in the critical winter range for wildlife, that the barbed wire or any wire be removed. Whether there is or not, if there's nothing there, then that condition would already be met. But having done enough barbed wire rolling up projects on land that looks very similar to that in the valley, I think that's important for making it easier for the wildlife in the wintertime.
Excuse me, do you mean removed or removed and if replaced as wildlife friendly?
Remove any wire on the
Non-wildlife
perimeter fence in the critical, down by the road doesn't matter, I'd say in the critical winter range.
And there is fence down by the road that's in good shape. And we have wooden I'm sorry, I'm just thinking of all the different, there are a lot of fences. But yeah, I think that's a reasonable request. Where there's old rusty barbed wire lying on the ground, that kind of thing.
Even that, I mean, on our place, we would always roll all that stuff
Right,
up.
and there is some of that. And
Animals get
we could
tangled
rid
up
of
in
Yeah,
it, and
yeah.
it's,
Yep.
I think it's good practice to get rid of it.
And
It
it's
maybe
what-
has sort of, historic, it's from way back in the history, but it's something that has outlived its purpose and is actually a detriment at this point.
And it's one of your favorite things to do, so are you volunteering to come help John?
I'll come and help you, John.
You're on, do an apple season.
Did you have anything else, Steve?
No, that's all.
Patty?
Yeah, as far as the TDR, the remnants of the TDR, I would like to see them specifically designated to historic preservation within the county, no or any other use. I want to keep that connection tight, because I don't want it to appear that the county's gaining for general fund purposes monies from the sale of a TDR. I'd like to see it, and I could be even more specific, but I think I'll leave that up to staff, is to determine where the best place, if any monies come back from that.
Could we put historic preservation or conservation easements?
We could, I'd add that, because it's a nexus there.
So the condition of approval currently reads, so we asked for a detailed plan of how we're gonna track the cost of the stabilization and audit. That plan shall include a check and balance mechanism in the event the applicants have remaining funds and those funds are donated to Pitkin County for historic preservation
But
purposes.
Glenn added on to that when he said that, or other uses. I want to make sure that other uses is there. But Francie's, I can support Francie's suggestion of historic preservation or conservation.
Did you want to say something about that?
No, I have a different question.
Okay.
But thank you, Francie, that's a good suggestion.
Okay, go ahead, Kelly.
Just two things in the resolution. Can you point me to the language where the water rights stay with the property? And then I wanna,
That's not in there.
also revisit what Leslie brought up prior with regards to the wildfire mechanism for the apple trees. I didn't read that as that they had to be removed. So had
Trimmed
this
back.
been updated before we saw, so is this the final as far as that goes? Because I didn't read that in here and I want to
Well,
make sure I got it right.
John saw it in the boilerplate wildfire mitigation stuff, and if you scale off from the house, the trees are about 16 or 17 feet away, and they would have to be removed because of the 30 feet of clear space. The wildfire standards say you can have some evergreen trees, but we wanted to make it clear that those apple trees weren't a threat to the house. So Jonathan went there yesterday and looked at it, and he said that we can keep those trees. So we just wanted to change this one, I got it right here.
Thank you.
It's page 6.
Yeah,
of the
page
resolution.
6. Actually, it's on page 7. On condition number 11, actually it's on the top of the page, it's 10E. We would just like to add that the 3 apple trees that are within 30 feet of the house can remain.
Didn't Jonathan recommend they be trimmed back?
Yeah, they would be trimmed back so the branches don't brush
And
on the
maintained
roof.
in that trimmed back manner?
Yeah.
Because they might grow back.
Okay.
Anyway, so we just caught that. John actually thinking of doing is making a reference to Jonathan's report. Leslie, you and I talked about this, and it's dated yesterday, so we'll just say consistent with Jonathan Loski's wildfire report.
Francie?
Sorry, I just want to go back to the water thing.
Can I add just to that before you do? I think that's completely consistent with the state wildfire, state Forest Service restrictions. If you have a tree that's close to the house, is it a prized tree, it's considered to be part of the envelope, and you don't have to cut it down because it's out. Yeah, so that makes perfect sense, and that's consistent with the state forestry as I interpret it. So.
Now, even Joanna let us keep one big tree next to
Right,
our house.
yeah.
Whoa.
She looked at it and she's like,
But you make the distance beyond that. You make sure you still have that fire break on the other side of it. That's how I've seen it, or it's been explained to me. So this sounds totally consistent.
Kelly, did you have more?
I just wondered where in the resolution it refers to the water rights
It's
remaining
not.
on the property.
So I will add that the water rights will be deeded to the property. Or I have language that I've used before, how it sticks on the property.
Keeps the water on the land.
Right.
Thank you.
In perpetuity.
Have you been waiting?
Yeah, he had his hand up. All good.
Yeah, you'll wait for that. Okay, Steve?
So I was wondering about the septic system for Eleanor's house. It's within the 100-foot setback. Is there a way you can put the septic, or at least the leach field part?
Yes.
Farther than 100 feet away from the creek?
We
I think
know
that
we
would be
have to.
good. The septic tank itself maybe could be within
It will have to be
100
up
feet.
here.
but-
We had an engineer out and did quite a bit of work on that.
Yeah,
and
I think that would be good to do that.
It'll be way out of the 100-foot setback.
Yeah,
It's a good
I was
point.
just looking at the topo thing, and it would be, if you go down.
It's gonna go straight uphill, much closer to the road, which is a much better place for it.
Okay.
Yeah, I was gonna find the map to show them.
Yeah, thank you. Could you put up the pictures? Here are a couple. I've got a list of a few things I want to discuss, and I think you've answered several of them, but I've got other questions. Regarding the sign on the road, an interpretive sign on the road and the visibility from the road, to me just seems, I'm skeptical that that's really worth even bothering to do. I've got to say, I don't, when I've seen I've never really noticed those barns before, quite honestly. Maybe next time I go down there, I'll have a revelation and see something. But I'm just wondering, what great public value is there to the visibility from the road? And I wouldn't be asking you to invite tours to come in, because I think that would be a complete intrusion. I'd almost suggest the opposite. Why bother? Do we really need an interpretive sign on the road to justify doing this? That one was, it's a red flag, and I want to put it open for discussion. I also kind of feel the same way. Some of these things, like the hog sheds, seem so far gone. I'm not convinced we need to preserve things that are that far gone or to do anything about them. That's my personal feeling about old things can decay, and maybe it's okay to let that happen. My concern, I really appreciate your efforts with the TDRs. That's creative, and I applaud you for what you're proposing here. I appreciate the conservation easement. To me, that seems extraordinarily valuable for conservation easement there. And I think, for me, that's more valuable than the historic preservation. And that brings me to the TDR. There will be questions in here, but I have to articulate this first. So the value of the improvements paid for with the TDR proceeds are really gains that will go to you and your family for renovating and building this improved property. The cost will be created by selling the TDR. But there's a cost to the community with a TDR. And this is where I always choke on. We're creating 2,500 square feet of FAR that will land in the urban growth boundary. That's a win if we can find a place to land it or in the approved areas. But that 2,500 square feet is still going to need service workers, a commute here from far, far away. It'll need utilities, it'll use energy, other needs that kind of come at a public cost in this. You know, this is kind of what we're wrestling with as we're trying to limit house size and we're trying to limit growth. When we create a TDR, we're creating greater demands on those services created by that additional square footage. And so when we give it for a historic renovation, this really isn't being renovated as a sustainable farm with a blacksmith shop and bunkhouses holding employees. It's a facsimile, you know, that harkens back to those days, but it doesn't do any of that. You know, so it's going to look like a blacksmith shop, but it won't be one. So I'm wrestling with this, and you've come closer. I've come closer to liking a TDR today than I have in the last 2 or 3 or 4 years, and so I really appreciate this. But still, those questions remain. How, you know, when you sell the property, you will be able to reap the reward from the sale of the improvements created by the sale of that TDR. I'm wrestling with the economics of that, and I have always done that. So I don't know if you have all I'll do is invite you to respond. But, that's where I am with the TDR. I love everything about this proposal, except that part I choke on. Thank you.
Do you want to respond before I respond?
My response is, you know, it's a classic decision for you as politicians, as you know, is that we have competing goals and objectives in Pitkin County. You know, one of them is historic preservation. We've got agricultural preservation, and the program that's been set up is one of the incentives is the TDR. And, you know, I understand your concern with it. That's why we've tried to, you know, address what the concerns that you and others have expressed in the past. So we really took our best shot at it. Mm-hmm. And but there are these competing objectives of trying to, you know, manage our carbon footprint and keep energy consumption and service demands down, and they're in conflict. So I think it's a matter for you as politicians and decision makers to just weigh the benefits and the costs, and that's what we ask you to do. And John and Janie have made their best effort to address concerns that we've heard. Do you want to add anything, John?
Is that your best effort? I mean, is that all you got?
Yeah, I don't know what more they can put on the
It's
table.
what we can think of. I don't know.
Apples.
I will say about the visibility, I mean, you're right, they're not right next to the road, obviously. On the other hand, and for this, I wish they were. I mean, it would be a bigger public amenity if they were. But they're not invisible either. We have had artists come in and ask to set up their easels on our property right in front of the barn to paint them. We've always said yes. We've had birders come in and ask to bird watch in the field around it, and we've let them do that, and in the historic orchard, because there are a lot of birds in that orchard around the pond, just because of birds like that kind of area. So I think there is value. I know there is value to the visibility of those barns for the public from the road. How do you assess that? How valuable? I don't know. It's all subjective, but they're pretty nice structures, and we get an awful lot of people compliment us on them. We don't deserve the compliment. We just happen to be the stewards, but they're on our land. And in terms of the value, you're right. The TDR creates value. I mean, will not create dollars for us because the dollars will go right into the project, but it will create a project that will add value to our land. That's totally true. I will add, if our only goal was to maximize the value of our land, and I've heard this from realtors, we wouldn't mess with the barns. We would preserve all of that GMQS square footage and put it in the big house. the big, which we don't have. The house is 34 or something hundred square feet. It's a nice size house, but it's, in this county, that's not a big house. So we would do everything we could, take every step we could to maximize the size of our house, because that's what buyers want. We're not selling. I hope to live in this for the rest of my life. So we're not interested in that, but that would be the strategy if monetary maximization of monetary value were our goal. That would be our approach. I don't know if that helps, but it's true.
And can I just add one more thing about TDRs? Sorry, Kelly.
No,
Just it's quick.
Looking at Francine.
Because I've thought a lot about TDRs, not just in the county. The city council grapples with the same thing. I was in front of council last night to discuss some city TDRs. And I really think TDRs are a tool that allow the entire community to participate in historic preservation. It's not just about the property owner preserving the structures or not being able to maximize how they want or whatever. It's a way for the whole community to participate, where the community does have to put up with a larger house in a neighborhood, but at the same time they get to preserve a piece of their history. And a lot of the tools that we have aren't felt by the community in that way, I don't think. So that's just my deep thoughts on TDRs.
Thank you. Thanks for that.
Patty?
Okay, yeah, thank you. Greg, I don't think it's a matter of don't bother for the interpretive sign. That's kind of what we do. It's just like houses you see that are historically preserved all over the country that have a plaque on the front of them. So people know that that house has some importance or that structure has some importance. And I think it just follows suit with what we do with historic preservation. And I think having a connection with that signage just to guide people to the Historic Society and how they can learn more about what's in the neighborhood or what's in the county, I think is critical. I mean, that's part of the value of historic preservation. As far as the things can decay, let old things decay, I think as has been very clearly demonstrated, it's part of the compound. It's part of what makes that property historic. It's not just the barn and the blacksmith shop. It's all those other things. And yeah, they're in ruins. They are but remnants, as John. But, you know, that's still, you know, that's still part of the historic nature of that property, and I think need to be shored up, not necessarily rebuilt, but however they determine to keep them from total decay or decay. What is it? The demolition by neglect.
Yeah.
So I think that's important. And for the TDR, I think, yeah, no, there's concerns on this board as to TDRs, but it is part of our incentive program for historic preservation at this time, and I think the Bennett's, you know, determination to restrict it, or decision to restrict it to the urban growth boundary or to properties that are already approved for TDR use is appropriate, especially when they are dedicating that money to go directly towards their income from that, to the preservation of those buildings, restoration of those buildings, and if anything is left over from at the end of the day, we don't know what the sale will be and what the cost will be, that it go back into some incentive for conservation, as Francie added, to historic preservation. So I think those things are extremely important and valuable as part of this application.
Can I?
Kelly's been waiting for a while.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I just, on this topic, I'd wonder from Sarah and Glenn, you know, if there's a hierarchy of incentives, like where the TDR falls. Like, is the second dwelling unit, like, the biggest of the incentive, and the TDR after that, and the exempt square footage after that? Like, just since you're here and we're talking about it, what your thoughts are on that?
I think probably the TDR is the most important incentive to the applicant. And you can correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, and it's because you've done a bunch of these, so.
I think it's the most important incentive in this case. The free market unit can be done in other ways, and it can't be severed from the property. It always stays with the property. It can't be condominiumized. So the free market dwelling unit is not as critical as the TDR. I think that's the most important incentive. And, you know, especially where we have a local family, you know, they're not wealthy second homeowners, that the monies that they would get from that TDR really is critical to making this project work.
And I think the hierarchy as far as historic preservation goes, the TDR doesn't impact the historic context of the site. So as a historic preservationist, I would say that's the most important incentive, is because it's not allowing, you know, more square footage or anything like that to occupy the site.
Thank you.
Okay, Greg?
Oh, I just wanted to say, another thing that I would love to discuss a little bit more is this, this offer to give the county whatever's left. And it's, in the movie business, if you're naive, they'll offer you a percentage of the net, right? And there's never a net. And I can imagine, as we know, things are so expensive here, that's really kind of a nice offer, but it could easily be nothing. I'm just wondering, as I'm grasping for ways to like TDRs, I thought this was an interesting proposal, and I was thinking, is there another way that we could have a piece of the TDR action, the county, historic preservation and conservation, that was more of a guarantee than the kind of the amorphous, well-meaning promise that we might get something in the end? And is that something
I'd like to speak to that. I would be really uncomfortable with the county receiving money from the sale of a TDR directly.
Why?
Because that is like a pretty strong endorsement of TDRs. And then it makes us look very suspect if we grant a TDR and then take some of the money. I don't
But this
like
is the
that.
county, this isn't an individual, this isn't Francie getting the benefit.
I don't like it.
Actually, Francie, we brought this up in a similar discussion, and the board said we had a moral issue here in just taking money directly from a TDR.
I thought we had seen it before, too.
And we had talked about this, and we opted not to go in that direction, but in this case, it's being tied to something directly. And I'm not gonna say, give me 50% of your TDR, and just give it to the county. If there's monies that are left over, and they would like to not just, what are they gonna do? Put it into a good cause, which would be historic preservation and/or conservation issues.
I'm having trouble seeing the difference from all that, but,
Well, I think that the money is probably gonna be used up.
I would
I don't know
assume
what
it
you're
would
gonna
be.
sell it for, but my guess is that encapsulating a inhabitable space inside that barn is not gonna be an easy
With the
project.
septic system.
It's
that's-
gonna be expensive, and, it's gonna burn through that money pretty fast.
We'll take the $1.50 you have left over.
I mean, I really appreciate the offer, and that's why I'd like to change the wording to include conservation, just in case, but just the way things are. Now, it's like $750 a square foot when you're not trying to save the outside structure. Right now, it's pretty crazy, so
I
that's
agree
my
with
thinking on that.
and last thing I didn't bring up was just about energy. To what standard of building are you going to go? Are you going for net zero? Are you going for, what are we doing regarding energy on these reconditioned structures?
Well, we want to be, I've already said, all
This will use
electric.
up all the TDR right here.
Yeah. We want to be all electric. We want to have our own all electric and 100% renewable. We want to have our own solar panels. We want to have battery storage, and we want 100% renewable backup energy from Holy Cross as backup energy.
Eventually. I mean, it's not quite 100% yet, but it's
From Holy
headed that way, Holy Cross.
Okay. And what we're paying for, they say is 100%. I mean, they sold
can
it to me
buy
as
renewables through
we're
You must
paying
be
extra
pa-
to get
yeah.
what they say is 100%, but
That's interesting. Okay, anyway, let's
I
stop.
don't know. I can't.
Oh, John, you're right.
They're,
you're
they're,
right.
Yeah.
they're great. They're wonderful. They're headed that way.
They're making a good effort, at least.
They
Depending
still
on
have a coal power plant.
Depending on the size of your solar farm, you could be net positive.
We could be, and I hope that we are, but I don't think we're gonna be, you already asked, and I said that our ultimate goal is to make, I'm looking at the house as I talk, but our ultimate goal is to make the old house, the existing house, 100% electric as well, and 100% renewable. I don't think the solar panels are gonna be large enough. I don't think we have the area, frankly, the geography, if you will, to make both the existing house and the two new structures all 100% locally,
Off the
solar.
grid.
I don't think we'll be selling energy back to the grid from all of that. We might certain times of the day.
Or a year, yeah.
In fact, almost undoubtedly, we will certain times of the day. But on a year-round basis, I don't know. We have had solar engineers come on site, walk around, tell us how many panels we need and where they ought to go. We've had those kinds of discussions, but we haven't gotten into the serious engineering yet. I know we can do what we're promising on the on the barn and the blacksmith shed. I'm not 100% clear yet on where we come out when we add the existing house to it.
Steve?
This is a different subject. On page 7 of the resolution, which is on page 484 of the packet, number H, 10H, it says all deadfall up to a 100-foot perimeter it says or, of the property line shall be removed. I take that to mean that clear around the entire 50 acres within 100 feet of the property line, you need to go up there and be removing dead trees.
Wow.
I think it's just in the activity of
Which to me, I mean, that's how I read it. Maybe it only meant around the activity envelope or something, but the way it reads to me doesn't make sense to have to go be removing
I'll admit I read
stuff
that.
out in a natural part of the thing in the conservation easement. I would rather leave the deadfall there or not remove it, but maybe mulch it in place or something, but I don't like that H, the way it's worded. I think that should be, that's an onerous
Maybe just
thing
the,
that doesn't make sense to me from a land management perspective.
so just the activity envelope, maybe?
Now, maybe it meant for the activity envelope, which maybe makes sense, because it's for the fire mitigation around the
Yeah.
structures.
Yeah, the code, you're right, Steve, the code says the area around all building and structures, it's regarding defensible space, it says all building and structures, and then it says all deadfall up to a 100-foot perimeter shall be removed.
Of what?
Buildings and structures.
It's not perimeter of
Buildings
the
and
property.
structures.
It's of
I
the
can't
structure.
believe how fast you found that in the code.
Well, and the idea
I'm
about
amazed.
or the property line was on a property where 100 feet would take you off of your property. We can't require you to do the work off of your property. That's, so the language, I guess, got a little murky there,
Within
but that's the
100-foot
intent.
perimeter of the building
Of the-
envelope?
The buildings.
Of the building
actual
itself.
structures.
That's a good catch.
That's all the dead
Make sure
wood in
that
the
it
right
still
pines
includes
on.
that property line.
That'd be terrible
Okay,
to
so
take
maybe
out
it
a
should
dead
have the
wood
words
county.
added, 100-foot perimeter of the buildings.
And structures.
That would put you right
To
in.
clarify the meaning, because I couldn't read it correctly, it wasn't.
Or
We
up to the
appreciate the
property line,
clarification.
because you don't want that to then mean they have to do mitigation outside their
Yeah.
property line, so make sure that's clear.
But if you have a beaver dam on the creek there, you'd be obligated to take it out.
It's not deadfall, it's a beaver dam.
It's dead wood.
It's in the water. Okay, I have some things to say, and Glenn, much to your surprise, I am not gonna vote against this, I'm gonna vote in favor of it, including the TDR. However, I do have some things I want to say about it. I really appreciate your square footage limits on the property. It's what the Fails did, and it was a huge selling point for us there, and it's really meaningful to me that you would do that, and when you don't have to, so I really appreciate that. Obviously, the 89% conservation easement is wonderful, because I can see houses on that hill under a future owner at some point. I think that's amazing. The solar power as well. I think you've exhibited a very modest and conservation-minded approach throughout this whole planning, so that's why I am gonna overcome my abhorrence of TDRs. I really don't like taking square footage off of your place and putting it somewhere else. I think 2,500 more square feet on your place would be less invasive in the community perhaps than in the urban growth boundary. Especially since you're not the kind of people who are gonna be hiring people to come and take care of that extra 25 square feet. But, and I know we're not supposed to take personality into account, but it is different when people like you bring us a project like this, which is clearly well thought out, environmentally sound, modest, compared to a new family from California or somewhere coming in and trying to work the system. So,
No offense to Californians.
definitely not, or anywhere else. Anywhere outside Colorado, of course. But anyway, I do really appreciate the thoughtfulness behind this. And so that's how my vote's gonna go when it comes to that. If you guys don't have more comments, I would
Theirs
make
is a public
motion.
hearing.
Oh, it's a public hearing, okay. All right, we're gonna open the public hearing. If there's anybody in the room or online who'd like to address this particular resolution.
We did have a couple people online, didn't we?
What?
We do have 2 people online. I don't know if they wanted to comment.
Yeah, I don't see any hands raised.
And they've been there from the very beginning of the
Oh, really?
meeting. Mhm.
There's Susan raised her hand.
Okay. So if you would unmute, we could hear you.
I'm Susan Taylor. I live in Woody Creek, and I had listened to this whole presentation, and it does sound exciting. And I am not in the Emma caucus, but I was pleased to see that the master plan of the Emma caucus was actually brought into this and looked at and kind of considered within the whole plan, because master plans, in my opinion, are quite important for the community that things happen in. But my one question, I noticed that there were quite a few exemptions, there were quite a few trade-offs, and I understand from being in many BOCC meetings and talking to commissioners that affordable housing is of, preeminent importance to the BOCC and to the community as a whole. And I saw that, I understand the TDR, I understand what the exemption is and the changes are about that. I noticed that there were 2 free market units, as well as a restored blacksmith dwelling and a restored barn that could both be considered livable. And I wondered if there had been any consideration to making any of these structures, especially like the barn or some of the smaller structures, into ADUs and or affordable housing.
Thank you for that question, Susan, and I'll put it in my own words and ask it so that you can answer it. I was going to ask the same thing, whether you had any, that's why I asked about it's not a CDU or whatever. So do you want to speak to that, John and Janie?
Sure. First of all, just to clarify, today there's 1 free market unit. Under this application, there would be 2, but there's not 2 and then something. I mean,
I get that.
Yeah, we could, I think Glenn already said, our top priority is to be able to build the project, and that's why we're asking for a TDR. If we didn't need that cash to build the project, that value to build the project, we wouldn't be asking for it, frankly. Whether or not, I think this is what Glenn was getting at in his words a few minutes ago, whether or not the barn, which will be a 700 and something square foot cabin after this renovation, whether that is a free market unit or a CDU, I mean, the code allows us to ask for a free market unit, and frankly, that's why we applied for one, but that is not a big deal for us. It's not, it doesn't really matter that much, I guess. Would you add anything to that, Glenn?
Well, I think you need to look at the intent right now is for Eleanor, John, and Janie's daughter to live in that unit. But who knows what will happen 10 years down the road or when there's a future owner. They may not want to have a relative in that unit. Maybe they'll want to use it as a guest house, let's say. So it adds a value to the property if it is a second free market dwelling unit rather than a CDU, which is why we made that request.
I do think there could be one difference between them, that a CDU is prohibited from being used as an STR, and a free market dwelling is not. So there is that.
True.
In the future.
Mm-hmm.
I understand that's not your intention, but so do we want to consider asking it to be a CDU? Is anybody interested in that? Or
Can I have a point of clarification as
Yeah.
far as STR? You would have had to have used that property for a short-term rental unit before such time, May something, right, in order to apply for a license?
Right now, yeah.
5-year window where it would have had to been used.
Yeah, and that property hasn't been used for a short-term rental that we know of.
No idea.
So it would be
couldn't
denied
apply-
in
they could
today's
be
climate.
apply anyway.
Yeah.
It would be denied today.
Yeah. And who knows, John and Jane may want to move into the small place and give the big place to Eleanor. Just letting Eleanor have that advantage over you.
Right.
But yeah.
Don't suggest that to her.
On this topic, I have a question. Is a deed restriction one of the incentives that are brought into this
It is
historic
not
preservation?
in our historic designation sections of the code, it is not.
And it's not required. It's not an incentive or a
Required, it is-
requirement.
It's not an incentive that an applicant could ask for.
And kind of to the reverse of that, I mean, the incentive is to not, have it not be deed restricted. You know, that's
Right.
the incentive is to be able to keep a historic dwelling and then, you know, have whatever else it is on
Sure.
the property. So the potential to have two basically free market dwellings is one of the incentive, you know, is an incentive.
Any other comments? Well, then I'm gonna be happy to make a motion. Oh, you do
We
have more
also have
comments?
somebody else online. Is that person not interested?
Still on.
Is that,
Yeah, you should close the public hearing
Oh,
officially.
thank you. Okay, if there's no further comments, I will close
Well-
the public hearing, and it looks like Steve wants to say something.
Yeah, I really like the idea of the use of the TDR for preserving historic structures. I am thinking specifically of two buildings on Capitol Creek that I wish they were back. One of them, the monastery, was required by the county as part of a land use thing to remove an old historic house. It was from the Gates family from probably 1900. They burned it down. And that broke my heart that they were required to burn down this house when now we have this mechanism for people to preserve that kind of historical thing. The other one was the Paul K. house on our place. It was right next to my folks' new house. And I totally regret that we tore that thing down. We should have moved it back to the original location where it had been located. Would have been a lot better thing to do with it. But that's just two historic log houses from around 1900 that were, you know, that are gone, that we didn't have an incentive or a mechanism for, you know, encouraging somebody to keep them. And that's part of our history that's lost forever. So I really like the use of the TDR to preserve part of our history. And consequently, I support this proposal.
Oh, great.
I'm gonna make a motion.
Okay.
I'm gonna make a motion to approve the resolution designating 2211 East Soapers Creek Road Historic Resources to the Pickett County Historic Register and granting incentives for the designation, including a density bonus and GMQS exemption for an additional resident and historic structure. One transferable development right, special review for an additional dwelling unit, and granting activity envelope and site plan review approval to John and Janie Bennett with the corrections and additions made to the resolution per our discussion here today. And I want to thank the Bennetts for bringing this application forward.
I'll
That's
second
not
it.
part of my reso, but.
I'll second it. Any more discussion? All right, so all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. All those opposed?
I'm just gonna abstain today.
Okay. So it passes 4 ayes and 1 abstention.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
All right, Francie? Oh, wait, I'll wait till after open discussion.
What?
I was gonna make a motion to go into exec, but we have open discussion first.
Just want to record this quickly, so.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. I'll touch base with you about apples.
Yeah,
Thank
please
you
do.
all for the
That
conversation.
sounds great.
John, if you get to, do you find some wire you want to roll up, give me a call.
All right, you're
I'm
on.
taking his apples, you take the wire.
You're on, Steve.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Leslie.
It is now open discussion. John, do you have anything for us?
I do not have anything for you today.
I have some information for you guys from ACES. I did hear back from them, but it was on my other email, so I'm going to,
March 15th.
About the wolf presentation?
yes. So, oh darn, I thought it was right here. Hang on just a second, I gotta find it. Here it is. Okay, so in terms of what they're asking publicly to people, well, first of all, it says, join ACES for an entertaining and educational evening about wolf reintroduction in Colorado. This special event includes film, dance, can't quite picture that right now, but music and an informative discussion about the reality of living with wolves, as well as voices from different stakeholders in and around Colorado. Guests will also learn about how to get involved by speaking with representatives from a variety of organizations working on the Colorado wolf reintroduction, who will be available to discuss blah, blah, blah. It is at the Wheeler. Then there's a funding requested is, it's really interesting. There's 2 documents and they have different numbers on each one. Down here, for instance, it says Gray Wolf sponsored $2,500 level. That would be medium and secondary logo placement on event invitation emails and marketing efforts emailed to over 18,000 national and local contacts, because we really want to sell ourselves. And then the company's name and logo on promotional advertisement, blah, blah, blah. Special recognition at the event from ACES's CEO recognizing your sponsorship. I remember that when Thomas Friedman spoke, exactly what that looked like. Recognition at the event on signage and promotional materials. And then it says 10 complimentary tickets to the event, which is really weird since they said one of the reasons they want these sponsorships is so they can make the event free, and they told me the event is free. Company name and logo included in social media posts. Dedicated table, we don't need that. Recognition on the ACES's website, donor wall, blah, 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 blah. So, and then another description of the event. And then up here, funding requested $2,500, $1,500. This amount would make it possible to cover Wheeler Opera House venue costs, so the evening could be a free event for our community and to bring respected speakers, blah, blah, blah. $1,000 to support ongoing education about wolves for our community and ACES's Tomorrow's Voices program. Educating Valley-wide high school students, blah, blah, blah. We know what Tomorrow's Voices is, right? A.O. Forbes.
And Willard Clapper.
And Willard Clapper. So that's what they're putting out publicly, so I would say they are looking for other sponsors besides us. I would like to sponsor it in some way as to support ACES. I think ACES does amazing work. So,
my only concern is it a pro or con? I don't want to go out
it's
there.
not
like,
either. It's
I know,
informational.
But I know, but
like a
it sounds
celebration.
like it's that wasn't really clear to me. I don't have a problem giving $1,000 to helping make the event free to the public, and I would like it to be designated that way.
Okay.
And if they want to put our logo on something, but to have it go all around the world, I don't want people to say, "Oh, Pickett County," even though our voters did support it by a large majority. But I think we're supporting this event because it's educational and not technically promotional for the reintroduction.
It's definitely not promotional for wolves. When I talked to them yesterday, it's
Yeah,
definitely not.
but what you just read to me it doesn't make it quite as clear as what you said
No,
yesterday.
it's rah-rah wildlife, which is ACES.
I'm just saying, but I don't have a problem with the $1,000 from our discretionary fund going to that.
Other comments? Steve?
Well, I voted against the wolf thing on the ballot. Thought it was really a poor way to do wildlife management by the public voting for banning the spring bear hunt in the Colorado Constitution. Stuff like that is bad policy to me. I still would support, though, putting money into hosting the event at the Wheeler Opera House and helping ACES out on that. I don't mind that.
You got 3 right there.
Well,
Are you going to abstain from this one, or are you going to tell us what you really think?
It's the first time I've ever done it.
you don't need
No,
to
it's
say-
not. You've done it before.
I haven't.
No, I think it's fine. I think it's an appropriate use of funds.
So,
I can't.
John?
I'm sorry, I was jumping in too quickly. I was just seeking clarification on the amount because I've heard 1,000 or
Patty said
2,000.
1,000. I mean, Chris asked me directly for 2,000. I'm okay with 2,000. I mean, I think ACES does amazing work, so if they use the money for other things, I'm okay with that too.
Can I?
But
Yeah.
technically they
Um,
can't.
I would love it if Chris Lane were to come down here and present to us, because I don't
He
know
will.
what this is.
He
I don't
will.
know if it's a celebration. I don't know if it's a party. It sounds like a dance party at the Wheeler.
At the Wheeler.
It doesn't sound educational, but perhaps it is. Maybe it's more celebratory. Maybe that's okay. I don't know enough about this, and as much as I want to support it, I'd like to know more. I think it'd be smart for us to understand what we're getting into and
Okay.
what we're putting our name on.
They're happy to do that, and the letter to me
Great.
did say, we'd be happy to, in fact,
Right.
it
I
said
think-
Chris would be happy to come.
Why don't we table this until they've had a chance to present on what they're asking for?
Okay, they need to know fairly soon. Can we fit it in on Tuesday?
We don't have a
We
meeting
don't
on
have a
Tuesday.
meeting on Tuesday because
Oh,
we
I
have
didn't know we
retreat.
had a
meeting.
We
It's
have
the
retreat
fifth
next
week
I
week.
of
saw
yeah.
the in future
Yeah.
agendas. It jumped right to Thursday, but
Yeah.
I didn't realize.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we could either
You
go
could just
with it
vote.
with the three of us and commit to $1,000 and still have him come
What are
in
you?
so that they know where they're headed with the project.
Kelly, what do you?
I'm fine, this is discretionary funds, but if other members wanna hear more info, I can defer to that too.
But that wouldn't be until what day in
Seventh.
February?
Seventh.
And you won't be here.
Or
I
7th.
won't be here, but, how about if we agree to, if we commit to $1,000 right now and we ask Chris to come in and explain it to us on February 7th or 8th?
If we have
February
time on
7th.
that, do we have
I'll
time
go
on that
along.
You'll
agenda?
go along with that?
Can
Okay.
bring it in during open discussion even. It should be a brief
Yeah.
conversation.
Well,
I'd
we need to
imagine.
make sure it's a brief. Steve, you won't be here, will you be here?
I'll be zooming in.
So hopefully you'll be here.
Did you get that, John?
No, I'm good with the 1,000 and having Chris come in.
Okay. I'll get in touch with Chris this afternoon. Okay, thanks, guys. That's my open discussion item.
Is there any
Anybody
other?
I still
Oh.
plan to put welcome wolves signs all around the county.
Until you go
You're gonna
camping
take
with your
your
kids and
election
your
signs.
dog.
Until you're running.
And nobody
Take your
comes
election
home.
signs and
Yeah,
post that on
exactly.
top of them.
I know wolves haven't been proven to eat human beings, but there's always a first time. Okay, so I need to make a motion to go into executive session for the purposes of
John has it. I'd have it too,
Neil.
but I'd have to open it. Do you have it ready in front of you?
attorney-client.
Give me just a second. I can get it for you.
Discussion of the Centennial deed restriction for affordable and employee housing. Discussion with council pursuant to CRS 24-6402-4B.
I'll
That
second
is
that.
exactly the right numbers. Nice job. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So
Glad you
upstairs?
remembered
We
that.
have to go
Jessica.
So
upstairs?
maroon bells?
Yeah,
Just turn off
because
the
staff,
TV.
yeah, because grassroots has to take down and so we're
Thank
going
you
out.
very much, Grassroots.